That's fine. I know. That's easy to cut out.
Well, then mute your mic so people
Yeah,
do
that's
find
fine.
this
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't promote you to panelist because you are the city of Durango also. You need to log out of Zoom and log back in.
Okay. Will do. Which one? Which one? The control room or the other one?
Not the control room, the chambers, council chambers.
Okay, I'll go do that right now.
items on there.
Then I'm checking audio. Are you getting me coming through?
Couple of minutes. I mean, you read exactly what's on the screen.
And then again,
7.1.
yeah, do you see that line in, line out, both three?
Session from August
Line in
16th.
three, line out
7.
three.
Yep.
Look
I
at it.
don't
City
think
council
so.
regular meeting,
They're
August
turned
16th,
off.
blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Oh,
You
no.
read exactly what it
Dias
says.
mics are
And you read
turned
it
off.
straight through. And then the council wants to.
How's that sounding?
Sounds all right.
Hopefully these are things that.
Coming through from the table?
Yep, coming through from the table.
Good. Good. We don't need, it's, you know, bookkeeping kind of stuff, it's daily.
Ooh, yeah.
Just put it off. Once in a while, there'll be something that they want to pull it off.
Oh.
Who knows?
How's that sounding? Any feedback?
No, I'm not getting any feedback.
I think there's a guy at your window.
Okay.
All right, so I think the only thing really is just to adjust the camera. And this is, I use this guy when I'm flipping it back around.
It's very high tech.
Yeah, see what happens is like
But
this.
we don't want it on here yet. That's
But
just
this
for
is-
the.
Exactly. I'm just
Okay.
thinking for right here, I found out like if you just grab this thing and go like this, you know, it makes it really loose. So I'm trying to keep it tight and use this guy right here. What if it's called? Under the, you know, what I'm talking about?
Yes.
His name for it.
It's that little groovy thing up there.
It's like a
Groovy thing.
1/4-inch pen, I think.
A little groovy thing.
Little groovy thing.
You just turn it. And it wiggles and goes. And then it's better. That's the hyper technical.
See. So it gets all jacked up.
Let me
Oh,
grab
now we're
all the
looking at
stuff for the.
We're looking at the ceiling now. Just that here, please.
Sorry. Let me get back in there and see what it looks like.
Think.
What I usually do, Josh, is I cut this person off right here.
Yeah, generally nobody sits over there.
Cool.
Much better.
That's great. That looks good.
Let me get the files
Yeah.
preloaded. Cool.
Actually, let's go ahead. Hey, yeah, go ahead and do it for a dry run. Make sure Nick can hear it. So,
Just get everything open, so I just minimize it and have it at the bottom. So this way, if everything is up in our control bar, so everything that we need is right there. Okay, let's go back to Zoom.
Nick, make sure, let us know if you hear audio coming through on the video.
I'm getting your audio.
No, on the video. So here, remember, go ahead and do share. Yep. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. I can hear the video audio.
Can you can see it, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And it goes to 7.6 and then it skips to another. That's just that one section. I've read it.
See, I think all this had audio too.
Pay in Durango, the cost of living in Durango, and people wanting to pay minimum wage does not work. You have to work 2 jobs, 2.5
It might be
jobs,
this video.
just to make the cost of living here, and it's not okay.
Because I mean,
I work at Sonic, I get $13 an hour. I'm never gonna find a house.
so it's just,
But anyway, so
I don't see a lavalier mic on anyone either, so I'm betting it's just the onboard sound, so it's picking up everything.
Hmm.
So it's these little beeps.
6 minutes.
I'll be able to sleep. I cook for myself. I'll be able to
We just have the
help out
the
other
valve, so we
people
can't, we
too.
don't know the audio.
Like bring them up and thing, take a shower and wash their clothes and then,
No, if I pull it into Adobe
Maybe
Premiere,
get a
I
little
can
rest and-
audio, see the
yeah.
I work 2 jobs. I work Dunkin's and Freddy's.
No,
I donate a lot to this place, even though I live here.
But
But I
it's at
still
100%
make sure everybody has if I have. If I got a case of drinks, the whole cliff has a case of drinks. If I have a slew of hamburgers, the whole cliff has hamburgers.
It has to be a generous community.
Generous. We're generous and we're humble. And most people would know that if they would take the chance to get to know us.
Sony
I currently
87.
live in my vehicle. I think people need to understand that
By the,
it's not always a choice, and like, I don't know, I feel like people that are homeless get looked down on, but a lot of us have jobs. A lot of us have multiple jobs in the community. Like, we're not lazy.
All these things are always
Ooh.
reset.
So the color spike at one point, one frame. It just go from that to like orange.
File folder that I keep in my, I would suggest you go grab. There's
I mean,
also
okay, your screen share. Stop share. Stop share.
check that there is a
All the way back to the beginning. We put that down.
All right, so Nick, since you're here, let's walk through now that, I mean, we're good to go. We're running, I mean, we're live streaming right now and that's fine.
change in this as we make
The only
sure
thing
that
left
on
to
the
do
screen,
is,
we have
I
to put in
will
exactly.
start
what
the
we
recording.
want. No spaces.
and then at the end, and then I'm gonna take
So
off,
each word is
and then Josh,
capitalized, no spaces,
you're
city
gonna
council,
shut down
city
the
council.
YouTube,
regular.
or you're gonna shut down the Zoom. And then
Yeah, so you just-
Nick will start the regular meeting,
Bang
and
on
you'll
the
have to
screen.
go back to the control room and re-log in. And
Yeah, so you're, it's
I guess
marked
my
as
only-
stream.
My only concern is just rejoining.
And that's why I
Hopefully,
if I
this
would
is
walk
the
through
same
it
position.
once and then have you physically do
as
it
before.
beforehand, and then Ben could walk through it. with
So-
you.
You should just do the join meeting instead of what we did, or we just paste the number code into it.
If there's any problems, what I would suggest is
So
just
if the
leave it
microphones would be
computer,
perfect,
because it might be,
it's-
I don't know, a cache issue on what's going on,
If I
that
could
logs
look
in,
up.
but I'm.
I turn it back on, it's
My keyboard, I feel like the other thing might have worked, but we just couldn't type anything in.
Well,
So maybe, but I don't know.
right now, just shut this down and restart it. and see,
Make sure you
right?
don't log in.
Because that should be the same thing.
So just,
Yeah, we can go ahead and, well, let me think about this.
Yeah, this is a particular, this is one version of Mondays.
Yeah, why don't you, hey, Nick, we're gonna leave and then rejoin and see if we have the same problem we had before.
Okay, I don't think you will, but all right.
Yeah, we're gonna try it again. So, yeah.
Oop.
going now, or should we just,
I would just leave the
Yeah.
study session going right
because
now.
it starts at 2.
So no pictures, and then, audio.
And then the only thing is, yes, we can't do it here. So the only thing is then back at Carnegie, the recording will have to, well, wait, we don't, I was gonna trip it on this. Hey, Mark, do we need the?
What's that?
We need the Zoom recording just backup.
Yes.
Always, yeah. So the only thing left to do then, Nick, is when Josh gets back there, just start recording, when the meeting's about to start, so we'll have that backup available.
This little bar should not be.
Yeah.
Up there.
Oh, the design guy. Always showing up, man. The old man.
Run around though, like chickens get their cut off.
Yes, but you know.
It's worth it in the end, right?
I ask you, how's the family reunion?
Independence.
Good.
And then we're on our way to a van trip. A van trip to Utah and Montana. Go fishing and mountain biking. Very, very nice. Well, we go back to fish camp on Thursday and then we leave on Friday. That sounds lovely.
You guys got audio coming through?
Maybe less people. Maybe. Let me just check in case she says that.
Oh, God. Jeez, Louise, sometimes it never ends. That's exactly what I was. Seriously? Like, really? Seriously? Oh, my goodness.
Test, test.
Has anyone heard from Jessica? I don't have a.
I have not.
Okay. Okay, you haven't heard from Jessica that she's running late or anything? Okay. Give it a minute.
The thing is, there's no way gathering.
Great.
And you have to go around the edges anyway. Not that many times it doesn't seem to be conflict at all. That's just my own opinion when I'm there, but you know. And also, you know, we have work from very nice people.
Okay.
That's 2:15.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon. Excuse me. Welcome to the September 6th study session. Thank you. I'm Barb Noseworthy, the mayor, and we're going to go around and introduce ourselves, and we'll get started.
Welcome back, Mayor. I am Melissa Youssef, Mayor Pro Tem. Kim Baxter, Durango City Council.
Olivier Bosman, City Councilor.
Thank you. And for the record, right now, Jessica Buell is not here, but if she does make it into this meeting, we'll announce her presence. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for filling in for me while I was away.
Very welcome.
On some official duties. We had some opening of the river trail and also groundbreaking. So thank you.
We missed
for
you.
taking care of that. So
And we did.
sorry, no worries. And we'll just let it be noted for the record that Jessica Buell has just arrived. Thank you.
And we did acknowledge you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you that I couldn't be there.
Yes.
Thanks. So I'm going to start as I do with study sessions and city council meetings. And my personal statement, it's a land acknowledgement. It represents my view. It does not represent the view of the council or other individual councilors. So for thousands of years, this region was home to numerous people, bands, tribes, and nations. Each had their distinct culture, artistic expression, and community mores. In particular, this region was the ancestral home of the Nuchu, Dene, Pueblo, Hopi, and multiple Apache bands, and various other tribes and Latinx people who used and stewarded this land. I recognize that indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands by the government. It is important to recognize that the narrative of this region has mostly been told from the dominant perspective, without recognition of those who came before us, and who to this day continue to thrive, create, and connect with this land. Thank you for your respect in my acknowledging this legacy. Thank you. So today's meeting, I just want to make certain we're all on the same schedule. We'll start with future new business and any review of agendas, things to go forward. We'll go into a discussion of pickleball, and we had lengthy comments in the materials in the package. We'll also go into an allocation of the 11th Cent Council's determined fund. If time allows, if we're on schedule, we'll take a break, 10-minute break. We'll go into a housing quarterly update, which will have 30 minutes for that and 30 minutes for fair share. And I really do want to make certain we have that full amount of time, because I think there'll be some real good discussion around that. So our goal is to be finished by 4:45 p.m. Everybody okay with that agenda as presented? And we will start with any future new business that anyone thinks we should be discussing.
I was wondering, particularly since it happens to be on the November ballot for the state, if after that, we wouldn't want to hear from staff on what the possible funding levels for housing are from the state, like maybe have a little bit clearer understanding of how that works and how it might take advantage of that.
So I'm just wondering around timing of that, and are you thinking just on housing or other funding? Because there's all kinds of other funding bills as well, like fire and things like that. Just
Well,
housing?
I'm requesting housing specifically because I think if we do more than one topic at a time, it can get a little bit, this is going to be pretty complex anyway. And I would say I'm not making a specific time. I'm just saying, obviously, after the November election would probably be the most, the better time, because we know whether or not some of the bills that are going to be on the ballot would have passed. I know how to deal with it.
Does anyone have thoughts on that?
What would we be discussing in terms of like ballots passing that our staff wouldn't handle first and then bring to us? Like, what kind of policy would we be direct, like, does that make sense? Like, what benefit would it be for us to talk about it versus staff handling it and then presenting whatever they suggest?
I think it would be good for us, since we've made it a priority, housing a priority for us, to have a good overview of what funding is available. Because we're going to be asked at some point whether or not we want to apply for it or take advantage of it. And it would impact possibly some projects that we approve, knowing about this larger picture, rather than one thing at a time as it applies to one project. I think one of our jobs is to be looking at things at a higher level and to be helping to create a vision about what could happen.
Sure, I'm not saying that I 100% agree with higher level vision, but without knowing like what's passing or what's to be discussed or what, and then how packed our schedule is through the end of the year, I would probably have to be, I would guess to.
I'm not saying before the end of the year either. I'm just asking if this is something that we would like to have a discussion about at some point in time.
As the liaison to the Regional Housing Authority, I would be interested, do you also see that something that that housing authority would also be benefiting from and looking at, and are there some synergies between our staff and what the I want to make certain not just synergies, but we're not duplicating efforts. So I was curious about how that relates to your work as the liaison.
Sure. So Marcia is, because she's the county liaison, and they are state related, they're an agency of the state, they're much more involved. Like, she's in all these meetings, determining, like with the legislator, having conversations about that, about what goes forward. And we don't have an executive director yet. We're hoping to have one here pretty soon, like near the end of the month. And that would also be their job. And then of course, Eva Hansen, our housing division manager, is on the RH. But none of that speaks to what the council understands about what's happening and what we might be able to take advantage of.
Can we like put it as part, like to talk about maybe the whatever legislation passes in November on a like one of the housing discussions or updates? Can we like add that into that? I would.
As far as like at the city council, or
Yeah.
just like on the city council meeting on the operational updates, or are you just talking when we have a next housing update?
You do the quarterly.
Yeah, like do you want me to do the
quarterlies.
quarterly? Yeah,
Okay.
and just like maybe have Eva after, which I would think she would be doing anyways, like after legislation goes through, just kind of evaluate and have like a discussion about around that. I would say that that would make sense.
Which for you? I think that's a good point.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, that sounds like a good plan. Great.
Excellent, thank you.
No, thank you for bringing it up. Any other items for future?
Yeah, I have one. There was an update from Durango Trails during the Parks and Rec advisory board meeting on some of the topics were region-wide connectivity on trails, as well as a byway within the city. I thought it was a very interesting presentation. I think it could benefit all of council to be hearing that presentation, especially as it pertains on visionary items, on opportunities for trails throughout our city, connecting them. And if there is no support from council for that topic to be presented, then I would still like to maybe take an initiative and proactively as a counselor or as a counselor on behalf of council, follow up on that, maybe with the COG or Region 9 and all the entities that are involved.
Can you explain a little bit more? I was taking notes and I missed something on who was actually bringing this up. Was it Parks and Rec Board or?
It was a presentation from Durango Trails during the Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting, which I didn't attend. I think you attended that one. And it was just very good. It seems everybody has the same, a lot of entities have the same interest to have better connectivity region-wide as well as within the city. And she also touched upon fire mitigation, having a byway that also creates accessibility in case of fire jumping closer to town.
So would one, and I'm just wanting to verify, but would one request be to even just have a presentation as we have regular updates from Trails 2000? I'm not saying that that's what we do, but would that?
I think that would be my
meet
preferred
what
because
your
I think it
preferred is?
benefits all of council.
Other thoughts?
If she's interested in presenting it, but I'm sure she is.
Could we do it like a,
An operational update.
yeah, operational update and have, yeah, Trails 2000.
Just like we're going to invite Bear Smart Durango to present.
Yeah.
You could invite Trails 2000 to present.
Great, Durango Trails.
Yeah,
Durango Trails. I always, that will never go away for me.
Is there support for that?
Right. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great.
So city operational update, Trails 2000.
So I'm
Durango
curious,
Trails.
was the
Durango
county
Trails.
involved in that as well, in that presentation?
No, but a lot of entities discuss the same thing. On the COG meeting, they had a connection from Cortez to Mancos, and tied into broadband to have a trail connection. I think I typically bring up, it would be nice to have trails from Edgemont to Twin Buttes to Lake Nighthorse, so it involves county as well as city property. And then this one, specific one, is also the byway that connects all our national park trails.
The reason I was asking is I was wondering, rather than a city council meeting, if it might make sense to propose it on a joint meeting with the county as a discussion, so they could get a sense of that vision too. If it ultimately, our goal is to be further connected into the county.
I think it's also a good idea.
Do you have a preference on that, requesting it of the?
So our joint board meeting this month was probably pretty full, given the topic that we have on it. I'm wondering if the next joint meeting might not be a good time.
Thoughts on trying to get, including the county as opposed to just us hearing it, particularly if we want, eventually we want the county to hear it as well.
When is the meeting in September?
I think it's the 19th.
But yeah, there's a reason behind it. But okay.
Yeah, and then the following would be, we would probably have one in
Joint.
November. Since you raised it, do you have a preference if we chose only one?
It's a good question.
Because it might be that long to get it in.
Well, yeah, but I think the presentation you were there, it was not that long.
No, I don't think that I was at that meeting.
Oh, you weren't? Okay.
I think it was a meeting after that that they had, yeah.
So from listening to the meeting, it was not that long presentation. So maybe it's to get the ball rolling. For me, it's always good to do it sooner than later, but because it will hopefully create some follow-up and then we have another meeting or.
It doesn't matter to me.
For me.
Okay, so let's,
The only thing that I would say is that I think that the county could have a more emphasis on outdoor recreation, which would apply to this situation in a way that would create revenue and economic development for the county as a whole. And maybe this is bringing the county into this conversation might help with that, help them to see how beneficial that could be for the community.
Maybe as a suggestion, since it's split up in two things and one of it is more city related, maybe you can reach out, it's Karen, and see if she thinks it's better that the county is involved or if she would prefer to split it up for a city update, because within city limits, the byway would be primarily that one.
Karen?
Her name's Karen.
from, what group is she from?
Durango Trails.
Mary
Mary
Monroe?
Monroe?
If it's
It's
the
Mary.
ED, it's Mary Monroe.
May
But-
I also make a suggestion to the city manager, which if you guys agree with it, why don't we see what the agenda is for the September 19th meeting?
Yeah.
How full it is. I think you're probably right. It will probably be quite full. If there's an interest in either having it then or at a future date, if we could gauge their interest in putting that on the agenda.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I need to make one clarification. It was actually the multimodal advisory.
There
Oh,
you
it's a
go.
multimodal,
That's why
okay.
I'm like going Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
And it's Mary Monroe Brown.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
So did I get 3 on?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let him finish the sentence.
Yes, what he said.
So is it, because I think it might have been a little bit different than what Councilor Bosman's was saying, so I just want to make sure that right now, what I think I heard at the end was to reach out to Mary Monroe Brown to determine if she would be willing to give a presentation at a joint meeting, and then finding with the county if there was time to do so at one of our joint meetings. Or, and I think you had something else, so that's kind of where, that's the last I heard. I didn't know if that was direction or if there's direction for another one.
And so maybe I'll rephrase the request. Maybe the request would be to reach out to Mary Monroe Brown to see if she is willing to provide a presentation to council, and if the presentation would be better had for council as well as county commissioners, or if she can focus it on city, the byway and the fire aspect.
Support from council? Can I see a sense of? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're
So
good.
for the option that Councilor Bosman got.
And if Mary also would consider, what I heard him say is, what does she think is beneficial?
And she had a fabulous video that only played like 10 seconds of it in the meeting, so we didn't get to see the whole thing. So I think she probably has a pretty good format already set out. That,
Okay.
we were all really frustrated that for some reason it wasn't working right. So
That's all I have.
Perfect. Any other new business? All right. We are going to have a discussion of pickleball options.
Mayor and Council, Terry will be given a presentation on the pickleball options that were discussed at the Parks Advisory Board meeting, as well as Natural Lands, or is it just Parks Advisory Board?
Just Parks and Rec
Just Parks
Advisory.
and Rec Advisory Board, thank you. On the different options between Smith Sports Complex and Schneider Park.
Council, Mayor, thank you for having me here. Terry Nyken, Parks and Recreation Director. I'm also going to invite Scott McLean, our Assistant Parks Director, up, and Lee Petty, who actually used to work for the city of Durango, but is now with DHM, to help present and then also answer questions at the end of the presentation. We'll try and keep our presentation quick and get to question and answer and discussion.
Sorry, may I ask, you said about 10 or 15 slides. We've got 20
minutes.
20 minutes allocated, and we have made up some time. So perhaps a full 30 minutes. I don't know how long your presentation is.
We're going to try and keep it to 10, maybe 15 minutes, but we want to leave enough time for discussion.
Please.
Yeah. Okay. I think I need to screen share actually, or are we on Zoom?
Yes, sir. You're right. Other one. One more. Go over. I'm sorry, Terry, back to the Zoom. Right there to the.
Okay, there we go. All right. Go ahead and get going. First off, we were working on Three Springs back in the fall of last year, and it came to our attention that we were getting into an accessibility issue to the neighborhood park that we were designing, as well as maybe a timing issue with the development of Village 2. With that, we as staff and Parks and Rec Advisory Board felt compelled to, not knowing what that timeline was going to be, to find an alternative option where we could maybe get pickleball in the short term. So we redirected our efforts and we started looking at some additional sites. I will say that Three Springs is still in the CIP plan. That's a little bit later on down in a few years. So it still is very much one of the alternatives that we would like to pursue, even if we do get pickleball at one of the locations that we're going to talk about today. So a little bit of background. Like I said, the city did recognize that pickleball is a growing sport, and that we were hoping to get that sooner than later. And with the slowdown at Three Springs, we wanted to move this forward. We started looking at various options last fall. And one of the options that kind of quickly rose to the top was Smith Sports Complex at Fort Lewis College. It seemed like a very viable opportunity. So we started working with DHM to design some concepts for Fort Lewis College. We had a public meeting on April 26th where we reviewed that concept. There was actually two concepts that we presented, one with 4 courts and one with 6 courts. We got their feedback. Their preference really was to have 6 courts and maybe even a condensed site so that we could get those 6 courts in. After the meeting, I will say that meeting was heavily attended by pickleball court or pickleball players. We didn't have a lot of other attendees representing other sports or athletics, but it was advertised citywide, and people were invited, anyone who wanted to participate to come and participate. After the meeting, we did receive feedback from our soccer and lacrosse communities who expressed concern over losing parking, but also safety concerns of having to cross potentially 8th Avenue to access an overflow parking lot at the Center for Southwest Studies. So, so we had that meeting. And this is, like I said, some of the other things that were discussed. It was presented that we would lose potentially 72 parking spots at Smith Sports Complex. Did recognize that there were conflicting user groups. And we, of course, the pickleball community wanted 6 courts over 4 courts. And they actually even said, we don't necessarily need shelter or shade. We just want more courts, as many courts as we can get. And then, of course, close to a restroom facility was preferred. So after the feedback that we received from soccer and from lacrosse, we stepped back as staff and said, okay, we need to do a little bit better job of analyzing this. So we explored 6 additional locations. We prepared a matrix and kind of compared those 9 sites, 9 additional locations, those 9 sites on 4 criteria: the size of the site, whether it could accommodate 4 or 6 courts, the location, whether it was proximate to city center, existing infrastructure, whether it had parking, utilities, and restroom facilities, and what the adverse impacts were: neighborhood noise, wind exposure, and impact to existing amenities. The one location outside of Smith Pickleball or Smith Sports Complex that came up was Schneider Park. And so we started evaluating that site as a location or a possible location. We held another public meeting on July 26th. There were 57 in attendance. There were some representation from our soccer community, so they were allowed to have input. And we presented both of those sites. We received public comments, discussed the highlights of both sites. The feedback from the pickleball community was actually evenly split between Schneider Park and Smith Sports Complex. And of course, the other youth sports communities preferred the Schneider facility.
Terry, can I ask you just a
Yes,
quick question?
yes.
One slide back. Was it 6 courts up at Smith?
Yes.
Yes, they're both sites.
I was looking at 4, but I just wanted to.
Those are just different sites.
It would be
Okay.
6. We did reconceptualize that site, and we do have 6 courts up at Smith as well.
Thank you. Sorry.
And actually, Lee's going to come up now and talk about Smith Complex, and then he'll talk about Schneider as well. So.
Thanks, Terry, and thank you, City Council, for allowing us to present these concepts. Everybody's pretty familiar with the Smith Sports Complex. So it's taking the east side of the site and taking a section of the parking lot that's already existing hardscape. So there's some advantage in that we're not losing green space, but taking a section of the parking area and converting it to the courts or into these pickleball courts. It's also really important to recognize the user groups. There are currently adult soccer, lacrosse, intramural sports use this space. NCAA often practice here as well. Yaffle, and then Ultimate Frisbee kind of comes through this or utilizes a space. We do have the Frisbee course adjacent. And then volleyball in the summer, and then tennis as well. We do have that existing tennis site that was constructed a few years ago. Gotcha. There we go. So, and also an adjacent, which is good to recognize, there's currently 193 parking spaces at the Smith Sports Complex. And there's also adjacent 156 parking on Fort Lewis College area that they allow us to utilize for activities at Smith. There is an opportunity that's still being fleshed out with Fort Lewis College for an additional 36 parking spaces directly adjacent to both the tennis and this pickleball area just to the south. But it's also good to recognize that. So in about a quarter-mile walking distance, you have about 385 spaces. So with that, the Smith Complex, we did condense it down to just these 6 courts, taking out the shade shelter, trying to provide, trying to maximize parking and limit the loss of parking. One thing that the community really likes is the interior fencing separating the pickleball courts. That's on each proposal. And then there's also some the exterior fence they do prefer with an 8-foot fence as well. So this really limits the parking, kind of the best scenario in this parking area. So it's a loss of about 51 spaces. So better than what we had in the first concept. And then with the additional possibility of 36 overflow spaces, then we're only looking at a net loss of about 15 spaces at Fort Lewis. And so it's a really good option. This has roughly $630,000, including the interior fence. Our cost estimate is $618 without the interior fence. So kind of between $618, $630 if it's lit. I think we're up to about $650,000 for the concept.
Does that fence have some kind of sound barrier quality?
This does not. We're just looking at the fencing. It would have windscreen. That's one of the concerns up on the mesa up there. And so that's one of the concerns, but not really in sound buffering. Schneider Park, of course, everybody's familiar at 9th Street, adjacent to the, just down the river from the skate park and kind of close to the 9th Street put in, which will be important for some of our parking. Existing infrastructure, there is a restroom, but would need some remodeling to suit the user group for pickleball. And then, of course, we have the trail along that area. This is currently being utilized more as a passive park. So that's kind of it'd be changing that use from a passive recreation use to more of an active recreation use in this area. Again, a quarter-mile radius, we did account for public parking within the city core and then also parking up around the skate park just outside the quarter-mile radius, but also looking the bulk of the parking would be at the 9th Street River put in. So roughly 85 spaces is what we estimate. And so again, with this concept, about 385 within a quarter-mile walking distance. So this concept, again, looking along this corridor, we did budget in. Yes, ma'am.
That one slide.
Yeah.
On that spaces, did you take into consideration the river put in and takeout usage? Because you're talking about that river corridor, and in the summertime, I know that gets a lot of use. So whereas you may not have the same usage up at Wilson Complex, I mean, there may be more availability of parking. Just because they're there doesn't mean that
There might be way less though at some times.
Soccer is
Yeah,
true.
I mean, I've been up there and there's no parking up
So
there.
interesting,
So I would argue that it would,
Yeah.
there are certain times where Smith would be worse
Okay.
for pickleball. They would have to walk from Fort Lewis, like across it.
And then while you also have that, I did want just one quick question, because I read one of the comments about sound traveling over the river, and I wondered if you took into consideration any of that.
No, we haven't. The only thing to really buffer sound would be more of a solid wall, and we didn't consider putting in solid wall in this area or vegetation to help buffer it. It's just a tight corridor. So no, we did not consider that in this area. But that is a great point about the river put in. We do see some use in that, so it could offset that use and cause a conflict as well. And again, with this one, the big goal was to end up with six pickleball spaces. That was what we were trying to accommodate. We are able to provide a little bit of a shade pavilion, similar to what's at the skate park, possibly some terrace seating because there is some grade change to get down to this area. So we would have the opportunity for some terrace seating, possibly for tournament play and that type of thing. This, since it is green space, we would have to account for stormwater quality. So we do have some stormwater basins that we've introduced in this as well.
And interestingly enough, it leaves not quite half of the park still a park, which is kind of nice too.
That's right. There is still quite a bit of green space available. Again, we do have the interior 4-foot fence and the 8-foot exterior fence. There's about 28 parking spaces directly adjacent that are currently, I think they're pretty open most of the time in my experience. And then we are accounting for some restroom remodeling. We estimate this one be a little higher just with some of the grading and having to add the stormwater. So roughly around 730,000 for this one.
Does that include the renovation to the restrooms too or no?
It's not yes, it includes an allowance. I think we had a 30,000 allowance. So it's not a full remodel, but it does an allowance for just dressing it up some. So roughly 730 for this Schneider Park concept.
Which it needs anyway.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, it's a great
Sure
request.
does. Just a question on the restrooms there, 30,000 allowance, and I think the restroom at Rotary Park was $500,000.
600,000.
$600,000.
Plus.
But it's already built. It's just like a refresh.
They had to tear up some plumbing and piping and all sorts of, then they found stuff underneath it that they didn't know.
I'm just
was
saying
there.
that seems
No.
low compared to others, but so-
This isn't a complete renovation or tear down, rebuild. This is a refresh to spruce it up, get it looking a little bit better and more presentable for the community to use.
Wouldn't be opposed to putting a little bit more money.
Well, and we could get into some of that during our discussion, but in the CIP plan that's proposed, we do have $800,000 in that proposal. So there is a little bit of wiggle room, and if we did find additional funding, we could potentially spend more money on the restroom facility or things like that. So we took from the July 26th meeting, we took the information back, compiled it. Lee did a great job. We brought it to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting on August 10th. We presented all the information, including a whole slew of public comments that we received, which are all in your packet. And they discussed it and came up with a recommendation that the new pickleball courts be built at Smith Sports Complex at Fort Lewis College. That was a 4-2 vote, I believe. It does say in your packet for sure. And then we did in the agenda packet provide a staff recommendation, and our staff recommendation was that we also follow the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board recommendation for Smith Complex. There's a couple things regarding that. We would need to go to Great Outdoors Colorado and ask for an adjustment or amendment because we would be taking an amenity away, in this case 51 parking spots. But we would also be adding an amendment. That's an administrative review by GOCO staff. It would not go to their board. But that is one thing that we would have to do. If GOCO says that they do not recommend that we go in this direction, Schneider Park is also a good alternative. So like Lee presented, both sites, quite honestly, have a lot of pluses and minuses, but we felt Smith Sports Complex, just given the fact that we're replacing hard surface with hard surface, not taking out any turf, trees, or vegetation, seemed to make the most sense. So that's the end of our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions and open it up for discussion. But today, what we'd really like to do is get some general consensus and direction from council on which site would be preferred by you all, so that we could send Lee off and get him to do full design on a site and put it out for bid.
I'm going to open it up, but I'm just going to thank you and the advisory board. I think you discussed pickleball 6 out of 8 or 7 out of 8 meetings.
Just in 2022.
2022. So let me acknowledge the passion from those in the community and your work through that. So questions of anyone on the project team?
Yes, I do. I have a question. First of all, I'm a pickleball player and I feel like we need both, but.
Three springs, right?
Yeah, really. It's such a great sport. But I was gonna ask to hear from Jessica as someone who's an active user as a family member, because, we don't have DYSA or lacrosse represented here, so I was just kind of curious. If I could hear from you.
Sure,
Just kind of your experience of what it's like up there and when, what hours.
Well, so for practices, when my boys have practice, who are a little older, most parents like drop off kids at that age and then go do like other things. So there's always parking spots then. The only time I've ever gone up there and not found a parking spot was during like the soccer shootout, during when we have our tournament. We have one tournament weekend up there. I'm not up there all the time though, so I don't know if there's other times that are like more heavily used. I will say that when we go and play tournaments in Albuquerque, we're walking way further than we do from when we park across the street at Fort Lewis College. Is that like there's or Grand Junction, the Grand Junction fields, you're walking so far to go to play lacrosse and to watch lacrosse. And so I understand, the frustration, and the parking is crazy. People would rather park illegally than park across the street at Fort Lewis College. So it does get to be a bit insane over there. And I know Tori knows and has been and seen it and stuff. But I don't know. I'm one of those parents that's like, I can walk across the street because I've walked much further than that to watch my kids play sports. And if my grandma's with me, I pull up and I drop it off and then I go park. It's not, I don't know. I don't find it that challenging or hard. The loss of like a total of 15 spaces to me, and my kids coach might hate me after this, but it doesn't seem to be so crazy bad. For me, well, go ahead, I you didn't ask me.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, for me, the wind up there would seem like a little crazy because it is super windy. Even a lacrosse ball that's much heavier than a pickleball like, can be a little crazy. But I like love the idea of a facelift for Schneider Park, because I feel like that could, and I know it's not, and I'm not saying I'm going that route, but I'm just saying that for me, like, because I go by that park all the time on our bikes, and I feel like something different, a new use, a facelift could, I don't know, help that area of the river trail a lot in my mind, just from a user. So not really related to losing parking up at Smith, but another reason. And I get it's a little bit harder place to put them because it's not on flat surface.
Okay.
Those are my thoughts.
Can I just add regarding the parking question?
Yes.
Saturday mornings through midday are probably pretty full during soccer season and when soccer and lacrosse are kind of going on at the same time. And then this last year, we did experience Tuesdays evenings when we had multiple things scheduled where we had quite a bit of parking up there and where there was some overflow during those.
If we do the pickleball courts up there, could there be better signage that that's where parking is over there?
Yeah, we can work towards remediating that either through scheduling and doing a little bit better job of scheduling as well as signage, yes.
Yeah, because I think that signage would be helpful. Be like, there is parking just right over there. I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
I have a question for Turi. Turi, I serve on that as the liaison to the Infrastructure Advisory Board, and we've talked about stormwater management a lot. One of the things that came up is that Parks and Rec, when it asphalts things, reduces our, our groundwater and our storm, it impacts our stormwater ability. So I was curious that you recognize that going with an already existing parking lot has benefits, but has there been any conversation with the public utilities about if you actually paved over the green space, the impact that's going to have into our community and to our stormwater management?
We haven't talked to Public Works necessarily about Schneider Park in depth, but we did take that into consideration, and that's why we put in the stormwater detention to collect it and do what it's supposed to do over at Schneider Park. And that, like I said, that's one of the reasons we preferred Smith, was because it's already a hard surface, so we wouldn't have those issues.
Yes, we did consider that and size those accordingly to the city requirements for additional hardscape. So it's kind of driving that design factor for sure.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'll give you my rundown here. I think on Schneider Park, there's, in that area, there's a lot going on. It's a prime riverfront location, along with, I personally am concerned that with the uncertainty and future developments in that area, NUSA upgrades, one of them, we might run into delay and changes. So delays in the actual execution of the project, and maybe changes if it takes place because it didn't match exactly the vision or the future view of that area. For the Smith Field, first I want to acknowledge the reduced parking and all the comments that we received, because they were all very valid. And I have also a soccer player and a cross player, and I use that area quite a bit. Parking is definitely, when there is events or competitions, matches, parking is problematic. I'm glad there was an option to reduce, and I'll come to that in a minute. I think we could have and should have maybe done a better job in communication outreach to the soccer association and the lacrosse association, to pull them in the discussion earlier on, because I think it was mostly the tennis players that we spoke to. But given the situation now, my preference would be to follow the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and staff recommendation in that direction with Smithfield. I would like to add that we, in my opinion, we should definitely make a commitment to, after a year of it being in place, to assess the parking and make sure that if the 36 parking spaces can be added, or the illegal parking that Jessica mentions on Talon Lane. I'm not sure if you remember that it's a dirt road after the turnoff, I think, and everybody parks up there left and right. Maybe that can be a road that we upgraded with parking left and right. When we spoke about Smithfield, Turi, you probably remember that I mentioned, why don't we put the pickleball courts on the side of the tennis courts? I think there was a drainage pond there. And the pickleball courts would be too big in size to be able to put it there. But for parking along Talon Lane, maybe that's an option as well as the 36. And in the end, we might have ending up with more parking space than the ones we lost. Yeah, so that's the Smithfield. Now, I do want to add one more topic here, which, Turi, thank you for clarifying the Three Springs decision on why that was not an option at this point. And I'll just run it by you, just for the record here. The parking is accessible from a residential road, as well as there's space for parking, there's space for a pickleball court. There's access through the neighborhood, and there's access through a dirt road. If I miss something, just let me know. And the city staff basically said we cannot, you didn't support it, didn't want to proceed with building those two locations, the parking and the pickleball court, because it would require access through the neighborhood or dirt roads. And then you looked into the upgrading of the dirt road, which is was dependent on Village 2, I think it is, Three Springs Village 2 development. And that pushes it out a long ways. So I go back to, maybe there were creative ways to get access even temporarily through the neighborhoods and through the dirt roads, and move ahead with that project as well. Because I think not so much for the pickleball, but also for Three Springs as the neighborhood, they really do not, and maybe I think, get their fair share in investment in recreational facilities. And yeah, maybe there's a creative way to move that forward too. I know the 2.8, was it 2.8 million for that area? Did it include the road, or was it that it did not include the road? So if that didn't include the road, maybe we're pushing that out even way further. Because if we don't come up with a creative solution, then they're not, if that development doesn't take place and the road doesn't take place, we have a lot to take care of before there's any investment in recreational facilities. So my preference would be to move forward with Smith Field as recommended, but I think we need to be a little bit more proactive for the Three Springs area on this or other recreation.
Concern for some time.
Again, we're not abandoning our desire for Three Springs. We're just trying to find a more immediate intermediary solution to providing pickleball, outdoor pickleball courts. for the
And for Talon Lane, did you look at that, the parking along the road, upgrade of the road?
I'm not familiar where's Talon Lane.
Talon
Lane
Lane
is-
is
Okay,
the loop.
yes. Yeah, we did look at both tennis and or pickleball and parking, but yes, that's what we're looking at 36 spaces. But also,
I mean along the road, so if you go from the intersection where you would go into the parking lot from Smithfield, that little section, if you keep going on that where it turns dirt road to the far end of the tennis courts, because the tennis courts now they have to park at that parking lot, and then basically cut straight through the bushes and the grass and cross the dirt road to the tennis court.
So that corner right below the project site is the area we've been talking to Fort Lewis College about. We still have some discussion to get through with them to know for sure whether we're going to be able to put those 35 court or parking stalls there. But we have been talking with them about it. But I will say it's not a for sure thing. But we do know, talking to them across 8th Avenue, we do have 156 so we can use as overflow.
But
So
the parking
I
along
guess
the road, is that an option that you consider, or would you be willing to consider that?
I think we
Bring
would
it
be
up.
willing to consider that and look at it, but I also think we need to work with Fort Lewis College because my discussions with them is they're gonna make that road their permanent ring road around campus. So that's gonna start getting more and more heavy
So-
traffic.
So we have about 5 minutes left on this topic, and I do want to make certain I've got a sense from all counselors of their view of the recommendation from both the board and staff. So I want to open that up to hear any differences or support.
So I was at the Parks and Rec board meeting when they discussed Schneider option. And there's a lot to be said for that option. It's easily accessible by the river trail. It's right downtown. It promotes people going downtown, having a coffee and playing pickleball and all those things. And I recognize the reduction in green space, but I also recognize that that's heavily underutilized. There's just not much happening there, and it often gets used in a way that is kind of uncomfortable for some people using the river trail and trying to have a picnic there also. So that's kind of challenging. I am concerned about the wind up on Smith's complex. I don't know if the Lee, you spoke to the fencing material. Will that alleviate the wind issues for the players?
Yeah, it helps. It's not perfect, but it does help. I mean, Schneider, as far as a wind solution, is a better solution as far as wind concerned.
And Terry, you mentioned that the pickleball players were kind of 50-50 on the 2 locations.
At the meeting, they were 50-50, but have received various emails personally to me saying thank you for Smith Sports Complex. So I think that overall their preference would be Smith.
Well, then I would lean in that direction.
Yes,
And then I'll weigh in as well.
do you want to go first?
No, you
Okay,
go.
okay, so yes, I recognize, I think the Southwest Pickleball Association, they do favor Smith. I do also see that this is pretty 50-50. Just a couple thoughts. I feel kind of 50-50 as well, but I do see the advantages of Snyder myself from an economic standpoint. So, you know, from an economic vitality standpoint, it's very interesting. You know, pickleball is really taking off in communities. People are traveling. When I play at the rec center now, I mean, I'm seeing people there and they're visiting in town and they come to town. There's these apps where you can go to a town and find out where the pickleball courts are. And people go and people are traveling to towns to play pickleball across the nation. It's really amazing. And so even myself, when I go into a town, I'm like, wow, is that a pickleball court or a tennis court? And I'm noticing it. So that when I heard first that this conversation was happening and that there was the potential user complex up at Smith, and that they were finding, Terry, that you found this alternative location, I was really excited about it from that economic vitality standpoint, because I thought, my God, it's right on the river trail. You know, they can finish, they can go into town and get, you know, a coffee or whatever. People can ride their bikes from all over town. They can play all day, especially if there's lakes. They can go, you know, you could meet friends, go downtown and go downtown for dinner. You know, it's like it becomes I just saw this as a real neat opportunity for Durango, from a town that, we had the groundbreaking ceremony for 32nd Street underpass, which was awesome. But there were years where we weren't utilizing our river. And I thought, God, this is an opportunity to be like, there they are. It could be a real draw. And so for me, that was really attractive. And I was kind of surprised, honestly, to see that people weren't kind of gravitating to this site, so accessible for so many people. And so I was a little bit surprised by that. Also the wind, also the user complex of groups. And I know that the bathrooms are better up there. And maybe for some, it's very accessible up there. There's a lot of sports going on right there in that picture to me. So, I mean, it just seemed like such a good answer that I was surprised to see it so close, honestly. It's really honestly surprised. I was like, really, we're still gonna move forward with that?
Yeah, I was surprised too. I thought Snyder was gonna be.
I'm the same way you are, Melissa. And the idea of access is great because that's one of the biggest challenges there. Without an e-bike, it's hard to ride your bike up to there, right?
Right. The bus will get up there and stuff, but God, it's so easy at Schneider Park for people, for so many people who live in town. So anyway, it was thought. I appreciated what you said, that there's still green space there. I also appreciate the fact that we are taking away, green space. That's a cringe. I really don't love that. But possibly this would be an opportunity to do it from an economic vitality standpoint, supporting our businesses downtown, supporting, accessibility, connectivity, utilizing an underutilized park, in my opinion.
So I'd like to, if I may.
Yeah.
Just go ahead. I'd like to say that I have concerns about Snyder, but I agree with you that I think it needs a refresh. My concerns are the noise. And, when I asked, you said, you're going to have a meeting and talk with people, but there's a difference between inviting, oh, here's the meeting and learning about it on the website and actually going out and talking to people and having them. So I'm real concerned about the noise with Snyder. I support the the Smith Sports Complex because I do think it's a great compromise. But what I would like to suggest with Snyder, and Councilor Baxter, you actually raised this a while ago, was dog parks build community. And we have one dog park that is not fenced. And you have opportunities here where, because I've seen it in places where I've lived, where when you have a community dog park that's fenced, you start having people getting to know one another and building that sense of community. So that it's not that I'm directing, but it's one way of thinking about taking care of this asset and what else can we do that will build something that people will come and use it. So it may not be that it is, in my case, I support going with Smith Field, but I do want to look at how to better maximize a park that I don't think has gotten the attention. The bathrooms are terrible. They need to be fixed at a minimum. But looking at it from
Best use.
a best use for that park, because right now it is not being well used. And I do think, given the interest from many people, and I'm no longer a dog owner, but who do have dogs in this community, the sense of having a place. And finally, what I would like to say is I would be really disturbed by turning grass into a parking lot. In this case, it would concern me.
I think they're turning grass in the parking lot.
Well, it would be turning it into turning it into pavement. Let me say that, turning grass into a pavement.
If I may make a comment about the dog park. My vision was not that we'd have two dog parks within walking distance of each other down there.
Yeah.
So my concept was that we would have neighborhood dog parks. And this isn't really a neighborhood in that sense. And that's actually one of the things that makes it interesting for pickleball too, is you don't have neighbors surrounding it. You have some up above over here, and you have some hotels and things across the river, but it's not really in a neighborhood. And that also I find interesting.
I would say the folks that live in the condos up there in that area and on Park Avenue consider that their neighborhood park, that Schneider. They don't use it now as much because it's not
I didn't say they didn't consider it their neighborhood park. I said the park is not in a neighborhood like traditionally, like the one on Park Avenue. It's surrounded
Right.
completely by houses.
I would just say too, if we were gonna have a pickleball court anywhere on the river trail or near, like, there's probably not much better spot than that spot right there.
Right.
Would be my guess. And it's a loss of some green space for pickleball courts, which is also outdoor activity, but there's still so much usable green space that even goes out past the restroom for people to sit in, and that's all that space is used for right now, is just sitting and picnics. And so I don't know. That doesn't bother me as much.
But you haven't done an analysis of Snyder, to Melissa's point. What you've gone with a prescribed, either, pickleball is here or here. But if you're actually saying, let's use this resource and make it for an economic vitality or something that it creates neighborhood. We haven't done that. You haven't done that thinking. You haven't looked into what that park could be. We've only looked at it, is it a viable use for this purpose rather than what could it become?
I think it's, I see the same as what you say. Mayor knows what it is. If we consider Snyder, then I would like to see all the uses that would be best uses, because I think that is a prime location on the river. And it's a very small group of, it's a significant group, but it's a small group. And I'm very concerned, and it's a pity nobody else confirms that, it seems, but there is a lot going on Rusa in that area that might impact a lot of things. So.
I'm not certain where we're at.
I mean, I
There's
don't think
support,
I want to
there's-
go backwards and do a whole analysis. In order for pickleball courts to be there, that seems ridiculous to me. So I feel like the staff support and the pickleball association support for Smith Sports Complex, I would just go for that. But knowing my desire to have the Rooster Park or whatever. Yeah, Snyder Park, thank you. Kind of revamped at some point in the near future in some way would be super. And I thought we could kill two birds with one stone with this, which I love the idea, but there's not council support for it. So I'll say.
Okay, I'm not sure that there isn't council support, there's two levels.
Okay.
But at the same time, I know we have a staff recommendation and a Parks and Rec recommendation, as well as a Southwest Pickleball Association for Smith. And I think it will work up there. I see it as a lost opportunity for Durango, I think, in general, because I think it would be such a great, I just see it as a burgeoning sport taking off, and I think it would be, a great attraction for our community, and accessible in that area for so many people on their bikes, to access it on their bikes, which seems so great. So I see it as a lost opportunity, but I want it somewhere. And I definitely don't want to push this ball down the cart anywhere. To take more time, we need to move forward. Like I said, I wish they could be at both. I'd love to see them at both. I'm really nervous too. I think I like the idea of minimizing the user complex up there. And that's why I'm also supportive of Schneider, but that's my own.
So you prefer Snyder, but you would support Smith.
I do prefer Schneider, yeah. But
I'm the same. I prefer Snyder, but I'll support. No one else prefers Snyder.
When I was at the Parks and Rec Board meeting, they presented it, it seemed like such a logical answer.
Yeah.
Right.
And
they get shelter there.
I know.
Noise, I just want to know what you're gonna do about
We
noise
could
with the
provide
neighbors.
additional amenities if we go to Schneider. We'd be able to put in a covered area.
Right,
yeah.
We'd have a viewing area for people where we'd have step seating and things like that. So it's a tough decision. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Which place is better than the other. Our recommendation was based solely on not losing, we'd prefer losing parking over turf. So I could see.
The noise aspect of it, there are houses right across the road from this complex. So, and they're actually residential, right there.
So yeah, as far as proximity, I think you're probably about the same in terms of residential impact. Because if you see that they're down below at this location, whereas Schneider, they're
So,
up above,
yeah.
and there are probably less impacted neighbors at Schneider versus this
Here,
area.
that's what I was thinking.
And regarding the water, that would be probably, if anything, impacting the Holiday Inn or the hotel across the river versus a residential area.
Why would you, in either case, why would you not build into the budget soundproofing? Or at least dampening
When we
the
looked
sound?
at one location next to the library, we did include that, and the estimates were pretty, they were with outreach, so it was pretty expensive for us to put in a 7-foot wall to dampen.
In addition, if you have a prime location on the river, it would be really unfortunate to build a block wall.
Yeah, I was gonna
to
say.
some-
Exactly.
Anyway, my position is I follow the staff and Parks and Advisory suggestion recommendations.
I came here thinking this one is so hard that I was really hoping that there was going to be some really obvious answer that we didn't hear before.
Right.
Because I do really like the idea of Schneider Park. And part of it's the conflict that's, already been discussed up here, but I personally, I don't know how to make this decision, to be honest with you.
I would also like to say that if you were gonna go with Snyder, I would want a full analysis of what's the best use of that park, because I don't think we've looked at it.
I would suggest Snyder. I want Snyder for pickleball courts. I think it's a great spot for it, and I'm not willing to do another analysis to push it back further. I feel like we just always push stuff back further. It is maddening. It's so crazy.
I have to say, I don't think it's either or. I think we've got some sense of
I agree.
support.
No matter which one gets chosen, I mean, if this one gets chosen, yes, looking at Schneider Park for something else is great, but I don't see it as an urgent thing.
Right.
And I personally would reevaluate Schneider Park if we want
I don't want to
to
waste resources or time.
I think that's, I just don't think that's the way.
I feel like sometimes when things come up and it's like we have a need for something, we need to just adjust and make decisions. And we like all the analysis and constantly going back and forth and redeciding. By that point in time, we're not going to be playing pickleball anymore. It's going to be something else, and we're going to need to redo it. And sometimes we just need to make decisions.
Okay, so I support the staff and the board's recommendation for Smith. So now I think we have two.
So it's Kim.
I know, that's why I'm like, this is, so I do have a question. As far as the Schneider Park area is concerned, were there any discussions with businesses and things in the area?
No, we did not have any discussions. They're across the river. We did not reach out,
So the hotels are not aware of this discussion.
other than what might have been, they might have picked up in our communication with the community to come to a public.
And there'll also be several studio apartments and one-bedroom apartments built right across from the river out of that whole development structure. There's been no outreach there either.
Has there been any
Over
outreach
to
to
those
people
people
in
there,
Snyder?
like,
No.
Well,
that should be the deciding factor.
No, but
We did community outreach. We publicized it. We sent it to, come down and give us your comments. We have 2 public meetings on it.
That's all you can do. You're never gonna make everyone happy. It's fine.
I don't play pickleball. I wish I did.
You
Because
should.
because then I'd have a better idea of the actual impacts of pickleball in the community. So that's, I just don't do that.
I watched it all this weekend.
perhaps you gave us information. Perhaps
No,
there
it's
is
not a decision.
because
Well,
we
we're
are
not making a decision.
No, but
today.
like,
We're making
you need
a
to go forward.
recommendation.
Yeah,
No,
but
we're not
we need to
making
go
a
forward.
decision.
So if we go with Schneider Park, I would like, as we do the planning, if we go that direction, to have more communication with all the people that would be affected in the area as part of the analysis, as part of the design process. But
I'm going to remind us that we are now 10 minutes over and we don't have a consensus. And even if we do, I think it's always better to try to reach a fuller support. So what
3
may I-
is all we need.
But may I ask,
Yes.
is there urgency to have a consensus today, or is this for information because we requested it? What is your time frame for some kind of decision?
I would say we've been talking.
Not that there'll be a decision today.
I say we've been talking about this for a year,
Yeah.
at alternative locations. We were going down a path, we pulled back to reevaluate, we went back down another path, found two very good viable alternatives.
Two
Um,
good options.
Two good options. If we would love to get under design so that we can get the design work done, so we could get it out to bid. If we start pushing it back further, we're gonna have bidding issues going into next year. And we potentially would then have some issues with actually getting it constructed. So we
I'm in
would love
such
to
a
get
weird
it out.
spot. I usually don't have trouble making a decision, as you all know. I usually know right away what I want to do. But I prefer Schneider Park, and I would be okay with Smith, but I prefer Schneider.
And like I said, both sites, great options. We wouldn't have to deal with GoCo. We wouldn't have the user conflict at Schneider, if you're concerned about that, but
Shelter, more things,
Shelter,
downtown
maybe some
access. I'm
improvements.
down, I like
Me
it.
too, me too.
I think
But
it also
I think it's
encourage further development of the park too.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I would love to see that park revitalized. Something different.
So I'd also like to know what you.
Well, Terry had something he was going to say.
I was just gonna say Smith Complex is a great option.
You're not
Well, you've
helpful.
given a, yeah, so.
You're not helpful.
Thanks a lot, Terry.
I think,
0 points.
I
We did our
think,
job, we've already.
I think turning the grass into asphalt or whatever it is comes with a cost to our environment. And I think you need to look at it, and I think Parks and Rec at some point needs to look at what is the cost when it asphalts things completely to our resilience as a community. Because the IAB was actually looking at charging, coming up with a fee for Parks and Rec for when they put in, so it cement, if you will, the groundwater system. It is going to have a runoff impact on our community.
Great, so then the taxpayers pay for it, so through that mechanism rather than through a groundwater mechanism.
And that literally what came down to the staff recommendation is hard surface with hard surface.
Yeah,
And that's
that
why
was,
we
that
went-
was kind of the deciding factor.
that was the way, that's how we determined which way we would.
I think that there's also a lot of capability at Schneider Park to have it be much greener. The area right along the river between the art and the river. I mean, there's a lot that can be done there for making it.
It was nature first.
I don't like it. So that's where I am.
You are where?
I just told you, I prefer Schneider, but I would be happy. I want one of them.
Me too.
So
That,
I would prefer
we're actually
Schneider.
providing direction here. So I mean, all of us,
I would prefer Schneider over Smith Complex, but I would be okay with Smith Complex if everybody else wanted Smith Complex.
so.
Three of us
Three of us
are providing direction for Snyder, I think is what it looks like. And so I would just say, if that's the case and three of us are providing direction that way, doing the outreach, and if it seems like it's not doable and you come back to us and say, no, like it's not gonna work there, obviously we'll all be on board for Smith Sports, because I think we all want this project to happen.
Can you add
For sure.
the Rusa project when you do the update on, so that council is aware of the projects that are taking place
Yeah,
there?
I have talked to Director Hill about Rusa, and that's planned to do some improvements. When we looked at it, we didn't feel like there was going to be a whole lot of competing issues with those projects going on simultaneously. So what we'll do is we'll proceed with Schneider Park, get into some design. We'll do some additional outreach to the community surrounding that area, and we'll start looking in that direction.
And may I suggest to the city manager that outreach, multimodal, from my one experience, was incredible when they were working on Russo. I mean, it wasn't just learning about it on the website, it was mailers to individuals come to this discussion. It was really a targeted outreach to that neighborhood with invitations. So I would like to encourage that level of engagement, because this is a change to that neighborhood.
I'm sure we'll get feedback after this meeting.
I know.
Okay, we have gone over, so we will not be taking a break. The allocation of the 11% council determined funds.
Yes, Mayor and Council, just to kind of recap the reason for this being on the agenda, I believe Chief Brammer did tell me in regards to the last council meeting, it was requested that the council had some time to discuss amongst themselves, maybe some ideas of what the council would like to determine well, with the 11%. Did check with finance and budget, and right now, assuming there's no added collections, there's going to probably be around 450,000 currently. And annually, if we look at 2023, being very conservative based on what we think we would get, be an additional 350,000 annually, but that may go up to 400, maybe a little bit more, but trying to set expectations somewhere in that angle. So just to let you know, right now, about $450,000 that is allocated in this 11% that can be used annually, anywhere 400,000.
50,000, 2021 only?
Yeah, 2021 and from 2021 and added to 2022.
So basically 18 months.
Around there, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's 18 months, okay.
So I will say that I went back to that discussion, and we had that's where we built a consensus, because, I had said it, as did Councilor Baxter, that, the priority, my own personal, was around housing. The discussion, and correct me if you have a different interpretation, and I don't believe, Olivier, that you were there. So, but we were going to look at using this funding for housing, and then I thought we would be getting some housing ideas of what. So maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think it was more like, because you guys were heavily advocating for it all to go to housing, and I was more advocating, and then I made the comment, like, you haven't even pushed for the 11%. So like, why not? That kind of was the comment. And then it was more, we just need to have it, and we can't determine that it's going to go to housing because it's council approval. This is a discussion on what we want to do with the 11%. Because I don't think we have concluded that it was housing or not housing or whatever.
No, that was just on the Rogers tax.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted,
Yeah.
I wanted to think. So thoughts on how to use this 11%.
There was a really interesting letter to the editor, I think, or maybe it was an email to us, I'm not certain, I don't remember which, but there were comments made about things that I think are true. We have no trash receptacles on the art. We have no benches on the art. We have no, we've kind of ignored those amenities for that trail and probably other areas of the community too. And I'm just wondering if we don't want to consider, now that we have all the way through 32nd up to Oxbow taken care of too. Right. One of the things that'll keep that amenity nice is that it's clean. There's no drinking fountains. There's nothing like that. And I'm just wondering if we might not want to consider some sort of installation and maintenance of those kind of things. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating like that's what the only option, but I saw that and thought about how we talk about those kind of things. Amenities that we have are fabulous, but sometimes we miss the details. So I was just wondering if we wanted to talk about that at all, that kind of thing. And it doesn't just have to be the art, it could be a lot of different things.
I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Because it's not that substantial of an amount of money to create something massive, whereas you could really have an impact and a quality impact with that, with upkeep and beautification of our current amenity. It's not enough money to do it with another amenity of any sort. So I like that idea a lot.
And that was like my concern when we were bringing this up and like going straight to housing, is that there's so many other like little things that I would love maybe like a little input from staff on, like time to like, okay, like that. Or I was talking with Jose about a program to maybe alleviate some of the parking issues that we've been hearing about.
Yeah.
Where, what does this go help fund, like parking for employees of people downtown to park in the transit center for free, or a testing of like weekends, or free parking at the transit center or something like that, to see if it's more heavily utilized before we get the parking study and determine if we want a parking garage or need one or whatever, all the things. But I just was, but like that's such a heavily used amenity for tourists and locals. And yeah, it could be way better.
I mean, it's 9 miles. It's all the way from Home Depot up to Oxbow.
Just thinking if they don't have e-bikes for the DPD staff.
Well, and
Both directions.
That's, it's
There you go.
actually a good way for them to get around and to be that social connection that we want the PD to be. I mean, that's
And
a-
also you talk about impact tourists have,
Safety,
our PT,
security.
our police department is a huge one. And, maybe funding e-bikes so they can be on the trail more, that would,
Yeah.
I would fully support something like that. I just feel like for this amount of money, there's so much, like littler things that we could do.
They could have a big impact.
Yeah, that could have a big impact.
And there's
I
not
would
good
add-
signage.
Yeah. And
That's
signage.
it. There's not good signage about being polite.
Yeah.
Being patient, what's allowed where, how we do these things. And so that's also all about that. Like, let's make it a better experience for everybody.
And I would also add, that there are no, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe there are any restrooms after Santa Rita until you get to Dallavetta. No restrooms. None.
What is the 2021 logistics amount? You gave the total for 21 and 22 and then the 23 onwards, but what is the actual amount for 2021?
I'd have to ask Cynthia exactly what we collected just for 2021.
Right,
Well, ask her for that one.
Shall I make my point here?
Yeah.
I'm going to assume it's probably 250,000, which is the agenda item here. It's the 2021 logistics. I actually agree with the email that Mr. Simpson sent out. That's the first one. Why is it just on the agenda 2021 and not 2022 as well as potentially onwards? This money is accumulated on top of 80 million plus that we have across the board.
This is
So-
part of the 11% that we are,
Yeah,
can allocate.
finish.
Oh, but I thought you.
I'm not finished. So we have, we
Is
have,
there a point of information? Because I heard 80 million.
can I
Please,
just
we'll see
continue?
if-
It would be nice. So we have about over 80 million across all the various funds, restricted, non-restricted, et cetera. Now we're speaking of a small amount of money. And then on top of this, the majority of council wanted to keep the excess lodgers tax to a ballot question and add that money as well. So it's 81 million, 80 plus one, over 80 plus one. And all the uses that we've discussed and are discussing and were discussed when I was not here, housing, parking, transit, benches, all of them are great. But there's not a single project that I can think of that has been discussed that we cannot finance through our existing funds, or sometimes it's necessary to have it financed long-term through bonds. So it's not so much about putting the money to work, it's about completing actual projects. And I certainly don't want to do more studies that do not lead to actual projects. My preference, if we have to spend this money somewhere or allocate it or have a direction, then generally would be to land banking, because that would be a structural approach. Growth areas in Three Springs and Raposa. I'm not sure if we have a lot of land there, but we need to look a little bit further ahead in the future to have opportunities for, when we speak about affordable housing, to have the opportunity for organizations to have an opportunity to have access to that land so we can help them address the lowest part of the income scale in affordable housing. And in a way, it ties back to the use of lodgers tax, which is paid by visitors and so on, that if there's better places to live for workforce, it automatically feeds in better experience for lodgers, hopefully. So I think, and we had that discussion, an email from Habitat for Humanity about them looking for land because their project in Bayfield was wrapping up. This is 6 months ago, and we're not making progress, in my opinion, not much progress. We'll come to that later today. But I think land banking would be a very good example if we have to spend 2021 or onwards, a good smaller projects. Why would that be part of this discussion? Let staff recommend all the small projects, the advisory boards, and let's just do it.
So, thank you. I do want to say that the 80 million, most of that is restricted and set in enterprise funds. So the available funding is less than about 8 million, so just as a point of clarification. But your point about land banking is an interesting one in the sense that it does follow, in some respect, the recommendations that came out of the housing report. And while I do want to say you make interesting points of updating, I think making the case that we we have made the case, at least I feel, help make a case that we need to start somewhere with funding for housing. And so I don't know if this is the best source, but it is a source and it is a recommended source. Start looking at available land for some purpose. So I myself am more inclined to support housing with this 11%, which we do have to allocate. It's not of the excess that's collected, it's of what we have. So we do have to determine some use for that. And so I find that an interesting suggestion. I'm open to other ideas, but I find that an interesting suggestion. Because it's also in the RHA report, right?
So I asked Jose if we were going to be getting any staff recommendations. I've been asking that for a while because I think that there might be some really good thoughts that staff might have about what to do with the money. I like the idea of land banking. I've always supported that. Is $450,000 in this economy the right place to put it? Or is it in a catalyst fund like the Economic Alliance is doing? Do we invest part of that with them so that the upfront costs are not so heinous on people who are trying to develop property? Or do we do some sort of rental assistance program so that when rental units get built, they can be more affordable, so that that's actually getting more things built? I don't know the right use for that. I don't know how that would fit in. So if we were thinking about that, I would want some recommendations on how to do that. And is it direct land banking, or is it something that accomplishes the same goal that land banking would?
I am open to all these ideas. I think that a staff recommendation and some ideas would be helpful down the line once you guys have time to think about it and plan and so.
I think just from a staff perception, what helps us is to hear the council's discussion. What is it that you're looking for? And then as we get those categories, we're able to then go run and grab a recommendation and say, here's what we heard, here's what we can come up with. Sometimes the staff, if we go out in front, we may come up with ideas that we wasted time on because the council is not interested. So charting these down kind of helps us say, okay, here's kind of some of the ideas that council's talked about. Let's talk about what this funding could do under these categories that came through. And then the second one, I think, was to Councilor Bosman's. It's just more of an apology on it. It's not really the 2021 lodgers tax on the agenda title wasn't looking at the fund year of 2021, but mostly we were using that as a descriptor of when the lodgers tax was passed in 2021 that allowed for the 11% determination for the council funding. So that's why we used 2021, and I apologize for the confusion. I could see how it could read that way.
For council discretion, though, we can only determine what we're doing with the the $450,000 right now. We can't say we want it always to go to land banking.
Well, we could say that we want in the next coming budget, the 2023 budget, for it to be allocated a certain way. We wouldn't know exactly how much it was.
Right, but we can't tie other councils.
Yeah, but we can tie ourselves.
Right, yeah, no, that's, I just want to make sure.
It would be appropriated in the 2023 budget and of what it would be that the council would like it to
So
go
the
to.
one thing I would just add to this, kind of piggybacking on your original thought process, Kim, was that with this 11%, we always talked about the fact that it would be kind of council determination based on the impacts of tourism. And why I really kind of like your original idea is because River Trail is so heavily used. We know that also by our community, like 90%, they say, have used it within the last year. And so just given that usage, and we know it's even going to get more, and we want to promote it. Let's just say the pickleball courts do end up at Schneider Park, things like that. We want to keep it beautiful. We want to keep it well maintained. The idea of receptacles, pickups, signage, beautification along it, better lighting if it's safe, drinking fountains, e-bikes for the DPD to patrol it. I really, that really qualifies to me as impacts of tourism, and it fits into that category. And I think that for me, I absolutely love the idea of land banking and housing, and I still want to bring those topics to the table in a bigger ability to actually have a greater impact through potential 2005 reauthorization, or that's where my mind goes when I think of housing is. I wanted, we can attack it through these little things, or we can really try to address it as a community, which is what I'm hoping we will do in a substantial way through a reauthorization and actually get some millions of dollars, not just.
So I'm going to
100,000.
jump in just for a minute. First of all, I think that Parks and Recs gets close to $5 million in its directed sales tax each year. And if they chose to make it a priority to have benches along the Animas River Trail and drinking fountains and garbage pickup, they could do that with some of those fundings. I think for me, the impact of tourism is felt by housing. I mean, we've got folks that I think we all know the shortage of rental units available and its impact from tourism. And so for me, this isn't an opportunity to say to the community, yes, we don't have the big funding source available, but we recognize that having people to work in our restaurants and in our stores and serve as our police officers to live in this town is important. We're going to take this initial pot and dedicate it towards something that can address housing, to improve the housing situation for our workforce. I think that's an important statement to this community.
So would you want staff like input on how we would use that, or do you want council to make that decision?
I would look to Eva and staff to say, here's what we could do with $450,000, have something of an impact and demonstrate council's commitment to really putting our money when we can get it into making workforce housing available.
Well, and the other thing is we don't have to put it all in one place.
Right.
I mean, we could put 100,000 into upgrades or into what we're talking about, mitigating impacts and making things better along the river trail.
Maintenance
and other
too,
areas. Well, maintenance gets paid for out of the general fund anyway, but I think these things are kind of and yeah, maintenance. And then, I don't know, 50 or 300 or something goes for housing, because I absolutely agree with you that one of the interesting things about reading in the housing, which we'll get to here in a little bit, but next year's housing division, I believe, is going to be paid for again with ARPA funds. Yes. And so that's going to go away after that. Next year after that, there won't be any more ARPA funds left. So we have to prepare for that, and we won't be able to do any re-ups prior to that, probably. Right. So we're gonna, unless we really move along, and in 2023, for the election, we do something about it. We could do that, but that would kind of have to be the commitment we'd have to make. Would be in 2023, we'd have to commit to getting something on the ballot about re-upping the money. Because otherwise we're just not going to have any. So, and I don't know if the rest of council is willing to do that. I'm willing to work on that, but I don't know if the rest of council is. So I do agree that we need to support housing going forward so that we can actually have people living here like a real town.
There's one specific project that I think would be beneficial because it's not moving forward, which is the connection from the river trail south of Santa Rita Park, the bridge on the east side of the river and the highway up to Santa Rita Drive and crossing it, which is CDOT property, I think. And this amount, because it's not that significant, but maybe it's adequate to work something out with CDOT on the pathway, because I think
From
all
Santa
the
Rita
growth.
Park to Highway 3?
So, no, from the bridge where the pathway is on the east side of the highway bridge, the bridge that was repaired just south of the Santa Rita Park. Does everybody? It's you go north from Rivergate, and at a certain point you go over the river, and on the left is the bridge from the Highway 550. If that pathway would be able to continue straight up north, staying on the right side of the highway and the river, obviously, then you have a connection from everybody south, Tree Springs, Rocket Point, all those people and all those growth that is currently taking place for them to go straight into downtown.
So Rocket Point right now can get on the river trail and go straight into downtown. I don't understand.
So all those places, when they hit the river trail, they go past Santa Rita, they go over the bridge, over the river, they go under the highway, go past Santa Rita Park, and then to go into downtown, they end up at the DoubleTree. Well, that's not, if you look at a map, it's not an efficient way.
So
You
you
can
want
go
them to
straight
go
up
through the avenues?
to go into downtown. That is the straight shot
So
into
you,
downtown.
so through the, so across the highway, and there's that, right now, there's a walking path,
There's a
path.
dirt trail, yeah.
Well, I've ridden my bike on it,
Yeah.
yeah, and it goes into the avenues, so it goes into like the east, sixth, and
Yeah.
south, whatever.
Now they go on DoubleTree and they have to cross, I mean, they also go through
I don't,
avenues and streets.
so that would be an at-grade crossing. Yeah.
If you have a vision, I would make a nice bridge for pedestrians and bicycles over Santa Rita. No, but that is where you want to end up. Yeah, you want to have a very efficient commuter network.
So
But
I-
it doesn't matter. It's a thought.
Well, it
I
does
don't want to go
matter.
into detail
And it's an interesting thought.
for,
but I-
for looking into at least.
Yeah, I do live in that downtown area, and I do ride that section all the time. And I don't see any, I don't see how that's any easier. It actually is harder because you would have to ride up a hill to get up to the avenues, because it is fairly steep there. Whereas the way it is now, it's just it's at the contour line into town. So I'm.
If
and
you
there
come
will
from
be
the
an
river
easy
trail,
note.
either way, you're gonna have to increase.
No, you
that.
don't.
So if you come from one side of the river, it's lower than the other side downtown?
Yes.
So we are.
It's
at-
on a hill.
Excuse me, we are 2 minutes away from time, so I wanted to see if we've got any other feedback.
I'll just add that, like, listening to all the emails we've gotten from people with opinions on, how to spend lodger's tax, which there's been a bunch, it's a lot of police, fire, downtown, parking, making sure that we're mitigating those impacts. So I support that. And then I do support the housing. So I'd love to see some staff ideas along those two. The hard thing I have with okay, here's $450,000. I want to know exactly where. It's not just housing. What project or what, how is it going to be utilized? And I think that that's something I'd like to see.
Well, I like that idea too, because they could do some cost analysis of what would happen if we did it on the river trail, all those kind of things. And is that 200,000, is it 150, what is it? And then the rest of it could be a discussion.
Yeah.
For housing benefit, whether
That's
it's
right.
land banking or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would just like it to go noted that there's no restrooms from Santa Rita Park to Dalavada, and that's a long distance for some people.
Yeah.
And what's happening is that the woods are becoming used. So I think you need to be aware of that. So if we're gonna build a trail, we need to make certain it's usable. Not with this money necessarily, I'm just saying there's funding to take care of those needs.
And did Parks and Rec pay for the Rotary Park restrooms? I think they did.
Yep,
Can we
600,000.
make sure as whoever's liaison that gets conveyed?
Yep.
So if I heard, we have consensus, or let me see, let me ask, do we have consensus around staff coming back with recommendations for what might be used for housing, also affecting parking? And was that it, or was there?
Trash receptacles, benches, drinking fountains, police, bike.
Improvements.
Yeah,
Like
those kind of
amenity
amenity
improvements.
improvements.
And the bike for the police is a good one.
E-bikes, yeah.
E-bikes. Great, now we are on to the hot topic of housing.
And we're right on time.
We are.
Here in council, we have Eva Henson to do the housing quarterly update.
Hi, good afternoon. I was thinking I'd try and sit here. or Do you want me at the?
No.
We can all see you from here.
Yeah.
If you want to control.
Can I do ask, are we going to stay within the strict 30 minutes for each topic? So, or do you anticipate blending it in? I don't want any topic to get the short change.
I anticipate blending it, but I would say fair share, we at least need 20 minutes to.
Okay, so I'll make sure we maintain that.
hard to see this far. I don't have my
This is that one.
glasses
Which one are you
on.
looking for?
I was looking for presentations.
keep going.
You could make it bigger too. Make
Yeah.
that whole thing bigger.
I think I can hardly see this far.
Yeah. Maximize it.
Yeah, right.
This is what's hard to do.
I would agree with you on that as well. Yes, we can work on that. Oh, shoot. First. Thank you. All right, lots to cover, and I'm excited to be here to talk about the work for the Housing Innovation Division, as well as initiatives, efforts, projects, programs, fair share. We're going to tackle a lot today and just really look forward to engaging, discussion, dialogue, feedback. I'll take a lot of good notes and go from there.
You can minimize the thing up in that area too. Yeah, this is a little minimized thing. To help a lot.
So we are busy in community development as well as many of the other departments right now, but lots of coordination, collaboration, and efforts. Community Development Department has been undertaking a number of interrelated initiatives to accomplish objectives outlined under the Affordability and Economic Opportunity Strategic Plan goals. The Housing Innovation Division provides a central point of coordination for all efforts related to strategic plan, AEO initiatives and objectives, the 2018 housing plan goals, and the housing work plan, including housing programs. So it's a lot of buckets there. I figured I'd break out our outline for discussion today. I also gave an opportunity sort of within each of those categories, share the information, and then we'll have some dialogue, questions and answers if that works okay for format. Perfect. So I'll cover some housing data year to date. I know some of the counselors had some questions about that. Housing program accomplishments, just really highlighting what efforts have been going on, as well as an outlook, of course, for Q3 and Q4, where we're headed with our plan for the remainder of the year. Covering an overview of the Alliance's 3-year workforce investment strategy and how that affects and coordinates within the housing program efforts right now. And then we'll dive into fair share program discussion, which will include that House Bill 21-1117 around inclusionary zoning and possible next steps to discuss with council too. So as you know, the housing website was refreshed in early 2022. We have been tracking the number of affordable housing units. What I would say here is this is going to continue to evolve. You know, I think what's lacking is probably more information about the unit type, sizes, what affordability or attainability did they target, what subsidies were contributed to get, to get those units developed. Was it land? Was it incentives as far as subsidy dollars goes? Was it a variety of efforts where grants applied for? That certainly would take a little more of a deeper dive for staff time, but at least this gives us that snapshot delta of what we're working with and where are we making some headway. So I did want to make a note that the Mountain Trace deed restrictions is the only fair share development that exists within Durango. And there are 9 deed restricted units. 4 of those were built and COs were issued this summer. So those closed and are occupied by local worker or local.
Actually, there was at least one more.
And there is at least one more.
There was at least one more, which was the lofts on College.
Okay.
But because the one fair share program unit did not sell within the short term, 90 days or 60 days or whatever it is, it went back to free market. And that's a huge gap in the way that that system works, because even these units, if they don't get purchased with those restrictions, then they go back to free market.
And that was a recent loss, right?
Within the last 2 or 3 years, yeah, 2 years probably.
When will you add that and the city park overlook at upon completion?
Yes, when COs are issued. But I will say, when I get to the housing dashboard, we'll talk a little bit about what I'm trying to create for a housing project page that will help illustrate and demonstrate where are we making headway with some of those developments, because it doesn't exist right now, to be transparent to our public. So current project summary, there are currently 18 residential projects in the pipeline. That consists of about 1,189 units that are either in review, approved, or under construction in Durango. The breakdown, again, is just an approximate snapshot, but we know it's heavily on the rental side right now, which is a very high demand and need as well. But it's about 891 units for 75% of those units that are in the pipeline, and then 297 home ownership, which is about 25% of the there.
Do we expect those to be completed in 2023? I'm sorry.
No.
And the 1,000?
Not all of those in 2023. I think what we probably as staff need to work on with the current residential projects in review is a better snapshot of when were they approved, when are they pulling for a permit, kind of tell a story. When did they pull a permit? When are they getting issued a CO? We know there's a lag time in between the parts, and then when is a unit actually becoming CO'd and habitable for someone? That could take 18 to 24 months. It just could all vary on size and scale of the project, readiness, labor, materials, a variety of efforts,
Their
infrastructure to the
funding,
lake.
I was gonna say, yeah,
to
their
the
funding,
line.
like there's so many
Funding,
parts.
there's a lot of complexities there. So it is hard for staff to kind of gauge when something will be completed. But what we could enhance on the report, again, is I think when something's getting approved, to tell that timeline, when is a permit being issued, and also when is a CO, just so we can start to get some lay of the land of.
It's funny you say that, because early last year when I was just on council, that was exactly what I was asking those dates to see if we're making progress. On the 1189 units, if I compare it to the beginning of last year when I got the first list, I think some of the projects fell off that list. So are you aware of it? It might be before your time or in between the early period.
They may have decided not to go
Well,
forward.
and this is, I'll just bring it up now. I asked for an update on these projects so that we as a council know if there's certain, so the objectives, I would like to have an update, but I didn't get council support at that point. So we can be informed of where we are on these projects, but more importantly, if there are certain roadblocks for a developer that we should be aware of, and the city obviously, so that we can maybe help a developer if a sewer line is in the way, or if there's a road that's not of the right size, that we take our part on our shoulders to make sure these projects move forward instead of them falling off the list because whatever reason. So that awareness helps maybe the council, but that is something I asked
I
before.
think we have to be very careful, and I'm looking to the city and getting into the operations of the deals that are happening and setting policy. So I do want to be aware, as much as we want to be able to help facilitate that development, there's a line getting into the operations.
But
Okay, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I also feel like with this council and the previous council almost, community development has kind of shifted in terms of that's what they're doing. And I would argue that Scott Shine and team of Savannah, everybody, like is working with developers to create like these projects that one, our community needs, and two, that's getting them done. And they are not in control when contractors fail or aren't getting funding. You can't control that, nor can you make them build something if it doesn't pencil out for them. So like trying to control that little operations part is not really our job, but I feel like our vision of working with contractors to help get the projects we need is absolutely what you guys are doing. So thank you.
So may I sort of step away from the operations aspect, if I may? So from your list, under construction, there's 3 projects under construction of 171 units. there's 6 projects that are in the approved category that have 560 units. And then there's 6 projects that are in plan review that have 262 units. So it's pretty obvious that plan review and design, and there's 3 in design of 198. So the ones in design are not going to get built this year, may not even get built next year. The ones under plan review are probably not going to get built this year. And the ones that are currently approved, 560 units, I believe those are mostly rentals. And so what I'm kind of trying to say here is that last year, this year from January to August, so far we have 49 certificates of occupancy issued. And those are all single family homes. So at that rate, which is free market rate, we're not going to catch up with the 2,500 units that we're behind or provide 250 units a year. The rental units will help with that. But I do think this is really good information because it's showing us how challenged we are and how much effort and how many dollars and political will we're going to have to put into this to help to make it successful.
And I have just one comment also on the housing website that you're building. I think it's really important, going back to Three Springs, because how many units of those of 1,200 will be new rental property in Three Springs next year? Several hundred, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to consider that's a neighborhood that we have addressed as having not been served necessarily equitably in Parks and Rec and other kind of services. So all of a sudden, when I don't know the volume, I don't know how many it is, the 1,200 of those units are going to come online, but that's going to change. That's going to add to the population base of that community. And again, making certain that we think about them and their needs as a part of Durango, but also as a distinct neighborhood.
Yeah, and to that point, getting the River Trail access connector, the spur line going this year and next year is fabulous.
It's so important.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
But I do think we need to see the sense of, what's happening in Twin Buttes, what's happening in Three Springs, what's happening in North Main. So we get a sense of the distribution of our resources.
And so we talked a little bit about tracking that certificate of occupancy here. This slide just demonstrates, originally, I think when I first came for the annual update in January, I've been here maybe 4 weeks in the role. So that was an interesting report to put together as quickly as I did with a lot of data. But again, this is evolving. And I think, we're continuing to learn. We're learning from negotiations. We're learning from projects. I'm learning as a new staff person leading a new housing division. So really, really appreciate the dialogue and feedback, as we continue to check in with you on a more regular and frequent basis so that we can continue to improve that outreach and advocacy work that we're all team community development departments. And so I wanted to kind of highlight, this is something that I had not shown in a slide previously in April. So I thought it was important to show some of those larger multifamily projects that have been approved this year. Now, again, I could put and go back and look at some of the planning approval dates and when do they come to city council, but just wanted to give a quick snapshot. So we had some units there to see, but River Roost Apartments, which is a motel conversion, it's 141 units. Anima City Park Overlook Townhomes with 22 units, 10 of those which will be deed restricted. The Three Springs Village Apartments, 211 rentals and townhomes.
And those 3 are under construction, right?
Those are under
construction.
Yep.
That is correct. Elevation Park, that ties in with the joint planning area. I know about that as well. I need to probably take a little more time to learn if there are other projects. You had a question about, understanding more in the joint planning area. So we can certainly look at that as staff. And that would be 138 single family townhomes and apartments. That's again, a variety of unit types. And then of course the Gage Apartments, which would be 89 units, 14 of which would be rent restricted.
And they're in the.
They're getting ready to pull, they've actually been processing a lot of the documentation, the plat mylars, the annexation agreements, and all the documents of support that I have in my office ready to be recorded. So we're just waiting on routing of the mylars, and then they are ready to pull some building permits. I think they have to pay a few fees, but I think we're all dialed in with that.
I think they've been doing some. They're not supposed to do that.
Not sure. This also, sorry for the small print. It's always hard to put some of this to scale on a slide. But this was shared during the annual report in January. So it's a good opportunity for us to continue probably doing that on an annual landscape basis. But this kind of shows you how many of each unit type, breaking it down for COs, and then for that year, how many were issued. And so it's good perspective. You can kind of start to see where some of those larger developments happened and where there was sort of taper off. You see 2019 and 2020, and then it starts to taper off again.
On this form, this table, the COs issued in county service area. Is that the county or is that the joint planning area, or what does that exactly entail? Because the number is quite low.
I'll double check with staff on that. I didn't put the chart together when it was created, but I can find out that question. My instinct would be joint planning, but the numbers aren't. The numbers are off if that's the case, possibly. So, and again, just a few of those larger projects that were in the last 3 years that were completed and are now palatable units for 2019, 2020, and 2021 for larger projects. And then again, just some Durango statistics. I've been spending quite a bit of time, besides just working on our normal work plan tasks, going and doing outreach throughout the community, talking about what are the efforts, what are our initiatives, what are we working on? And so this slide just comes from some of those reports that I do on outreach for the division for the city. But this is the US Census data, how many units that we have in the city, and then what is the breakdown for home ownership rate versus renter rate. And now I've added, so the census doesn't do this, but now I'm also adding that in as we start to make progress on adding workforce and affordable units in our community. That number will start to change for the ratio depending on how many market rate we're adding and increasing that number versus how many affordable attainable, but starting to again put some perspective.
So in that realm, what would also be good is what percentage of the population is in that range that that housing stock would support. So if it's 20% of the population needs that kind of housing, and we only have 6.35% of the housing stock that addresses that, that tells us how successful we're being too, especially as that changes in the future. It's kind of like that ratio of attainability kind of thing, but it's a little bit different.
And how do we determine that people who are commuting from Aztec and Farmington and elsewhere who aren't part of the population
Absolutely.
actually are now able to live in the town they work in? So how do we measure the influx of people, the commuter decrease, which we would anticipate because they would be able to live here?
That's a really challenging
That's a
question.
It's very
challenging one.
challenging.
But it would be
And it
very
may be
beneficial.
anecdotal to start with. Maybe I'm looking at the chief. He may be telling us, hey, so many of our staff are now living in town and we've seen a reduction. Or you may have to start by being anecdotal, but the school district will have that same.
Yeah, I would think you'd
issues.
reach a 9 potentially.
Well, we have
Or-
350 full-time employees. And I'm sure we could do a report through HR that tells us how many of them actually live within the city limits. And we could probably use that to extrapolate across the community.
I think it's always a fine line of how much measuring and how much studies and staff time is being spent on items, let's just call it general, versus actually addressing housing and supply and making sure
Yeah,
there's
it
a
will-
pathway forward, because we'll need them at every level.
Yeah, I agree with you that data requests are sometimes a little bit more than maybe staff should be doing, but under this circumstance, we have to have a way to measure, are we being successful with what we're doing or not? And if we don't have a measurement of are we being successful, then we don't even know what we're doing.
But we know we are not successful.
But we won't know next year if we're being more successful than we were this year.
I can tell you, you look at the amount of COs or issues.
COs will not tell us this kind of information. Are we providing the kind of housing that our people who live here need with their income levels? We need to know if we're addressing those, if there's a match. Just providing housing isn't necessarily matching what our people need, because it could all be very expensive housing that they can't afford, and we don't know that.
I think it ties a little bit with the studies. There's a huge number of studies done by different entities and organizations that tell you in 20 years, we need 500 3-bedroom in the AMI range from 80 to 20 or 80, 120. And another study tells you about renters. And
I'm not asking about
but
studies.
I'm just saying, these are a lot of numbers, but
I'm
we
not
know now,
suggesting
and we know for
studies.
the next 3 years.
I'm suggesting
gonna-
actuals.
So I'm gonna keep this moving, but I am gonna ask, as the liaison to the Regional Housing Authority.
Yes.
Do you have data measurements that, or are you working on measurements to define success?
That is not something that the board would be doing. That's something that the executive
Okay,
director would be
so-
doing. And until we have staff, that won't be a part of the process.
I'm gonna keep us moving along just to keep us on schedule. What else? Other questions, anything so far of what Eva's provided? Right, thank you. Keep moving.
Okay. City website and housing. So I worked with our communications team as well since the refresh of the website to just track visits, visitor sites. I mean, they have some more data about how much time they spend on a page, where else are they going. You know, the housing pages I would say are a variety. We have the ADU program, we have the short-term rental program, we also have just our housing program now and subsidiary pages for that. But a good takeaway just from this snapshot of year-to-date look from the previous year to now is it's almost tripled to our housing page. And so we know people are going there. We want to continue to evolve and enhance that information on the website. And we'll continue to add projects and units and more breakdown so that people can find that information and also find out, where do I go to find out if I can get on a wait list, or is there a wait list, or where can I find out about pricing, or how can I get more resources from Homes Fund? And so we're linking a lot of that information through the website, but it does take time. And so we are adding, you know, updated periodically when we can, but that just attests to that we are seeing more traction to the housing pages, as well as not only tracking the data, but resources including housing needs analysis, so the 3-year workforce investment strategies on there. We're also linking to a lot of the grants that we're tracking through the affordable housing realm through state and federal funding. So there's resources there. There's also the developer guide to build affordable housing that Chafa came out with this year. So that's on our website, as well as housing incentives as we continue to create policy and funding for those.
So if I may ask, I got a request today. The articles in the paper were really, I thought, positive, both of the recent articles. But the questions I was getting is, how do I apply for these deed restricted housing units? So when will that information be sorted out and presented and shared with council and then eventually the community?
As quickly as we can possibly put that out there. So we are working with the developer on the deed restrictions. That's in coordination, not only with the developer who will be the seller, but also Homes Fund. So there's a few moving parts between different agencies, but we're getting close. And so.
Did you mean the ADUs or did you mean?
No,
the actual in the city park over the town.
Yes,
Yes.
I mean, getting phone calls already. How do I get on the
Yes,
list?
yes. And so we'll work with our communications team and work with Tom and his staff as well.
Great.
And that'll be on our website. It'll lead to Homes Fund website as well. And just, again, providing that guidance and structure for those units. So we're working as quickly as we can to get that created. We're also working through processes with Homes Fund to help administer those units. It's sort of the dual effort there, but we're close. The ADU program and new ADU for locals rebate program also went live last week. And so we are getting a slurry of interested folks that are asking about, is my property eligible? What are the ADU text amendment changes that may or may not make me more eligible to have an ADU, as well as the incentives and how to apply for the rebate program. I also interviewed this morning with Albuquerque CBS Channel 13 news station that'll be putting a story together on this program for the city of Durango. So that was my morning.
That's nice, because that's where we get our news.
Yes, and that is where we get our news. So, so the Herald did put out a story today on the ADU program. I think the only thing that we are working with the newspaper to get corrected is they misquoted me around the development costs. They said I said $7,000 to $11,000 for an ADU for development costs, which is incorrect. It's the development fee. So the rebate program is around that. So just wanted to clarify that in case any questions come your way. We're certainly working to get that. And any additional questions about some data? I think I've gotten good notes and feedback, and we'll continue to evolve that.
No, I think it's great. Ideally, we see it on the housing dashboard. I think you're working on that too, the CO's issue and the history. And so on. So,
Yes.
very good.
And we've been consulting with a couple of different folks, just corresponding on costs to help make the dashboard more enhanced, similar to kind of what Region 9 has for a dashboard, so that we can kind of make that a little more glossy and more illustrative on the page versus just text.
Thanks for your efforts on it. I think it's really, really helpful to be able to see it all in one place. I know Olivia's been asking it for a year, and all of us are interested in the information. It's really, really helpful.
So the staff report included a pretty lengthy list of the second quarter accomplishments. This list is just a quick overview for some key select housing initiatives. It's not the exhaustive list that was provided in the staff report. The public-private partnership to develop city-owned parcels, we are moving forward. The RFQ closed. We received 4 proposals. We have an evaluation team. We'll be interviewing the top 2 teams here in the coming weeks, and then we'll be coming back to council as we continue negotiations with the selected developer for that. So that's exciting on the city-owned parcels and assessing what potential.
On that topic, I think, because we spoke about land banking, and I think it's always interesting how the city and the council approaches city-owned parcels, whether that should be integrated in a larger development and then have a combination of affordable housing, or if it would be an approach where parcels are basically given to organizations that run with it, like Habitat or the VOA. And yeah, that's maybe something in the future for discussion.
Best Western Motel conversion, we were notified from HUD on the $3 million congressional funding award. So I've been working with our contracts grant specialist. We are in the thick of the details for that, but it's really exciting. I'm learning too through this process for that grant. We met with the developer early this morning to talk through the NEPA study that's required that we'll need to submit with our application before we can get our grant awarded for those monies, and working through some of the details around acquisition, the closing date of the hotel, and some of those other details. So more to come on the Best Western. Twin Buttes, we've been meeting on a regular basis, looking at the Animas High School parcel site. And so we look forward to bringing forward, hopefully, an MOU in early November to City Council regarding next steps around that for attainable and affordable housing development on that particular site, as well as leading towards the housing compliance agreement, which we have been a few years in the works, trying to get that finalized for them, and so getting them 100% satisfied. They also, obviously, the 1% transfer fee is taken into consideration, land donation for affordable housing purposes, and then how many units.
Tell me, and again, who are you chatting with on the Twin Buttes? Is that with the original developers, the homeowners association?
It's the development team.
The development
directly.
And it's not the original.
No,
I
it's
don't
not
know.
the
I don't know the
original.
original team. But I don't know the original team. Is it different?
It's not, no.
No, I see there's the.
Okay, there you go. I didn't sorry to put you on the spot. It's like I just don't know. Okay. Let's see what else. So 2022 Housing Incentive Program, the staff report identified where some of those monies have been spent, and then what we identified possibly for later on this year for infrastructure partnerships and maybe other programs to spend that money. As I mentioned, the ADU for Locals rebate program is live, and we continue to update the housing website, and we also submitted our 2020 proposed budget. Second quarter, so it's been a lot going on. Any additional questions about the accomplishments for the second quarter?
You've been incredibly successful since you've been there. Yeah. Getting a lot, and it's good work. It's things we can use and things.
A lot more time. I'm looking forward to maybe having another position, which you guys will eventually see on that proposed budget. So Okay, 3-year workforce investment strategy. How are we doing on time?
You have about 7 minutes if you want to have 20 minutes for your share,
We'll go
which I
through
think
this
we
pretty
do.
quick. So the report came out in June of 2022. It broke down what does the plan identify? The document identifies what entities are doing, how the work could be better coordinated, what activities would be best leveraged, public and private sector resources, and how progress can be measured. Other key strategies in the report: increase rental housing, both tax credit below market rate units, increase for sale opportunities through policy mortgage assistance and creating a regional land development initiative, reserve mobile home parks when feasible, create a dedicated local housing fund for post-COVID, continue with education and advocacy efforts, activate employers and formalize opportunities for their participation, create a housing catalyst pre-development fund, and as well as a few takeaways from the process. So the report was put together with the help of Capelli Consulting and Project Moxie. So staff, others certainly contribute to some of the efforts that are within that report, but it does have a very concise plan of how to get units into the pipeline, especially around funding sources and coordination and collaboration with other jurisdictions as well.
So could I ask a question?
Sure.
On that? Go back to the
Oh, sure.
45,000. Please. So 45,000 with $450,000. I'm just using an example. That would help you get 10 rental properties. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, I think the report did try and do a snapshot for subsidy. I would say staff is finding that these numbers aren't really applicable on the ground in the pipeline. They're too low. They're too low to actually get units within these newer developments. The subsidy, the incentives, the infrastructure costs, the land costs, the construction costs, the labor costs are through the roof. And so it's a moving target right now for the subsidy. And it's why it's difficult too to really come up with like a black and white policy on infrastructure partnerships, because we're learning through each of these negotiations on every project of kind of what are those barriers? What is it going to take? Is the land shovel ready or not? Some of these, the cost can be much more higher if there's no infrastructure in place too.
And I would encourage you to think in terms of incentive rather than subsidy.
So when this report was presented to the RHA, one of the things that I mentioned is that they keep focusing on the dollar gap for each unit. And one of the things they didn't focus on was return on investment. So how long does it take the developer to get their investment back and then start earning money essentially? And I did all the projections based upon their numbers, and I don't remember what my answers were right now, but it wasn't that long. It could have been 8 years to 12 years for your return on your investment, given certain interest rate. I think it's stuck in an interest rate and all that kind of thing. So this seems overwhelming. You're like $450,000 for only 10 units. We'll never make this happen. But if we can present it to developers, and they, of course, this is how they think too, but we can facilitate that return on investment versus trying to fund a gap, we might be also able to get some more things going forward.
This, again, just as a snapshot from the report that was presented to the RHA. It just talks about the other opportunities that could exist for local governments, private entities to agree on scaling larger big project, as well as funding redevelopment. And identified in the staff report, I think I put one of the key questions and takeaways is how can the city of Durango use this information to inform our next steps? Coordination is a key component. Political will is a must, adopting innovative policies, dedicating sufficient resources, and layering various funding sources. That's staff's perspective as well, but I don't know if council had any other feedbacks about that. But these are all vital elements to success of our strategy in the report. And again, tangible results, the outcome is more units. And also, I think I put on here, what's next? So that it doesn't just sit on a shelf. and isn't being implemented. So Economic Development Alliance will be putting together a subcommittee. I've volunteered and have expressed interest in being part of that committee as well. For the Housing Catalyst Fund, what that criteria look like, what's the process look like, how do folks submit, projects and things like that. Coordinating Division of Housing funding, a good example of that with staff has been Best Western with council on how we did our private activity bond allocations and delegation for that project in particular. But again, looking to sure there may be other needs. We may have to be selective in what projects those get contributed to, or they go back to CHAPA. We can also do that. And selecting the regional development project through a coordinated selection process, and then reconvening employers for more formal conversations on strategies.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's go on to homes. Oh, we're not there yet, sorry.
Yeah, so housing work plan, again, I won't do a deep dive. This was included in the staff report as well. But what will be occurring for the remainder of the year, housing priorities are integrated into development review decision-making and looking for ways to continue to streamline, completing negotiations with Twin Buttes and providing an MOU to City Council, finish review of the bids around the development on city-owned parcels for Florida Road, provide leadership and coordination on the 2 strategic expansion areas as that work continues for La Posta as well as Three Springs, continuing to support the URA efforts to incentivize workforce housing, expanding partnerships with local nonprofits because we need help and assistance with administering deed restricted units. So we're working through some of that on the rental side and home ownership side. Assisting and reporting on the process and again, doing outreach on those reporting efforts, tracking state and federal funding opportunities. So besides also going to the ADU Live program last week, I submitted our letter of intent to the House Bill 21-1271 Housing Incentive. And so there are a few projects that we included to that. We'll learn from DOLA if we move into the next round for a pre-app meeting to then apply for the grant. But there's a coordinated effort in our region. Several other municipalities applied. And so that was a very big, heavy lift for me to get that submitted on Thursday. But it's for several $1 million for the city of Durango for projects.
Excellent.
So that was really exciting. We also closed on our house last week. So your housing manager has a new house.
You have a house.
I have a house, yes. So just know that we've been moving.
Not in the city limits.
It's not in the city limits. We are out in the county. We are in the valley, just north of town, near Ames Valley Elementary School, so our kids can walk to school, which is pretty fun.
That's nice. It's very nice. It's a good area.
But nice area. We've been under contract since January. We were supposed to close in March, and we closed in August.
Wow.
So it's been a feat the last 8 months. So just really excited to share that with you for last week too. And then releasing an RFP potentially to seek assistance with the Fair Share program. And so that leads us into Fair Share.
I just want to make a couple of comments. First of all, I appreciate everything that you do and all the programs and all the numbers that we were showing. To me, what is often missing is we have to realize it's builders and developers that add housing. And I really would like to see it a little bit faster, streamlined, consistent implementation, make it cheaper instead of more expensive for the developers and contractors to do their work. Consider, I'm not sure if all the fees are up front. Maybe it's beneficial to look at fees at the end of the project, or we'll come to that in the Fair Share ordinance. The way that some of the fees are paid for, whether it's an actual fee or a transfer fee. We'll get to that. And how we can encourage it, even if we, because the numbers I saw on the certificate of occupancies issued for 2021 was 96 within city limits. 96 is not going to do anything. And the 2 years before it was around 300, and the 8 years before that it was around 100. So it is not working. Whatever we're doing, it's not working fast enough. And is it because we're too complex, or is it too many procedures, or is it too stringent, or is it too expensive? Because house prices have gone up because of demand and COVID, but we certainly are not helping keeping the price down by making it, having all these fees and structures. The delay in some of these projects, I remember Cummins project, I think it took 2 years and they ran through several architects and developers to even get the project off the ground. And time is money. So very little is spoken about on the actual contracts and developers and how we can improve that process. I have my feedback from them. And I think it should have a higher priority on the list.
I believe, I'm gonna address that and then I'm gonna Curtis, because we've got to get through the fair share. I believe we actually have a working group that was working with the county and the Alliance on addressing some of those issues. I'm looking at whether Scott.
Scott's on vacation.
He's on
Yeah.
vacation.
And developers are involved.
And
in that
developers are
conversation.
involved in that working group. So I know that there's a group that's been assembled and looking at what are the roadblocks or obstacles and how to address that. So perhaps on a future discussion of community development, we might get an update on where things are with that. One of my suggestions for you to think about. Can we go into fair share?
Sure. It might be the code working on it. That comes to mind, but maybe it's.
No,
there's
it's a
something
group
else.
okay, centered around La Posta and the county as well.
Okay.
Having some of the permits, more alignment and permitting. I believe the Alliance was working on that. Or perhaps even our liaison, Councilor Baxter, could eventually give us an update on where things are with that.
So the City of Durango 2022 Strategic Plan and Housing Work Plan have both identified the fair share program updates that are needed. Where are we at with implementation? We know it's a priority. And so really wanted to take this opportunity to talk about what efforts have been happening for the staff level, and then what are potentially some of the next steps, but also wanted to give some ideas around some of the data around the fee and lieu that have been given to Homes Fund. How are those deployed? This is just a quick snapshot, how many fair share units. Obviously, we talked about that earlier with the 90 restricted. Fair share loans, 35 fair share mortgage assistance loans, which is about 71 people assisted, for a total of 740,968 in mortgage assistance. 21,171 is the average mortgage assistance loan amount, and over $10 million within homes have been purchased for that total.
So I just want to make one comment here, which I make all the time when I talk about mortgage assistance, is that this does not create affordable, attainable housing. It allows people who cannot afford a home to buy a home. So it doesn't expand our inventory. It's a one-time situation, because if they sell, they sell at market rate. And I know the money comes back into the program, and I think it's great that there's been 35. That's over how long? 7 years?
Yeah, I think about give or take.
Okay, so that's great, but it's not the tool that's going to crack the nut. So
again, this is just a snapshot of those fee and lieu funds that Homes Fund has received and how those got deployed out, and just a 10-year outlook of the fees. And then again, how many mortgage assistances.
So on this one, I do have a question, because various times they get waived, or there's some other arrangement, and that does not get captured in this, I think. Is that correct?
Oh, you're talking about the fees that might get waived on an affordable housing.
Yeah, well, is it the fee and lieu that they received, is this only what we gave them, or is there more to it?
I think there's more to it, because they have a funding stack that they can actually, depending on your income qualifier with Homes Fund, there's a variety of additional assistance that can help leverage them into home ownership. It's not just the fee and lieu funds.
yeah, they have like a foundation that garners revenue in order to do this also.
So maybe I'm ahead of the presentation, but are you going to give a number on the total fee and lieu? That was all the amounts that were collected?
Not in this particular presentation. It's an effort that I've been working with budget team as well as finance.
Yeah.
Those revenue streams for accounting purposes were not created due to the housing division initially. And so we're working through some of the accounting to get that squared away. I think that also impacts the housing fund forecasts and some of those numbers that you guys were seeing. So we're working through that. We worked with Cynthia to get some cost centers reestablished. That'll also help for the annual reporting that I need to provide to Twin Buttes and Three Springs. Now, Twin Buttes and Three Springs, yes, I have a cumulative total that I can get from them. They just updated that on Friday for me. And then their forecasting of what that transfer fee will cumulative potentially compound over time to collect and receive. But the fee in lieu is a little more complex for us to do a deeper dive. And so I haven't put that into this particular to make sure we're covering what do our next steps look like for council to provide guidance and feedback on.
Thank you.
Sure. And again, this is just another snapshot for the mortgage assistance loans that have been deployed. So House Bill 21-1117 went into law in the summer of 2021, as council is aware of. The law clarifies that local governments may regulate the development and use of land with their jurisdictions in order to promote new development, redevelopment of affordable housing. And further legislation confirms that the rent control statute does not apply, so that you can also include that now into your inclusionary zoning. So staff has spent some significant time the last couple of months researching other communities in our state in particular. And the staff report, Denver was sort of the go-to community that we've been monitoring and watching. And so the staff report laid out their process. They did hire a consultant and a legal team to help do and overhaul their program, as well as outreach to the community. And it took them about 18 months. That just went through the public process in July. And so that will eventually here get implemented very soon. And so that's kind of why I wanted to use them as an example of it's going to take us some time. We had thought potentially we could do it internally, but I think we need to do an additional nexus study, and we need to do some more outreach with our key stakeholders, development teams, and other nonprofits to kind of see how that will inform the program. It's my understanding, I don't think, in just talking with our city attorney, we can't just include rental development, walk away from our inclusionary zoning. We have to offer alternatives per the state statute, which could be pay a fee in lieu, could be donate. The fee in lieu would be complex to create methodology. Glenwood Springs is a good example. They have selectively only chosen you build a unit for rental or you donate land. They don't even have an option to pay a fee in lieu for the rental side of things. They've gotten one unit so far.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're not gonna get anybody.
They're not
building
gonna get
anything.
anybody, but
Yeah.
again, just, you know,
No
that's why
development.
we're trying to learn from best practices from other communities to kind of see how that is affecting and impacting development in their area.
I'm not sure, are you almost done with this or?
Almost there, yes. So this is just a quick snapshot of some other communities that we've been comparing to in our research. We looked at Park City, Utah, we looked at Glenwood, we looked at Denver, we looked at Longmont, we looked at Boulder. We've also looked out of our state, but we also looked at Basalt and Carbondale to gather a lot of data around who's doing what with inclusionary zoning within the state of Colorado. And then just a quick snapshot for council, which I think we'll, would like to get some feedback from you on, is doing a new scope of work within an RFP. So the city was unsuccessful when the RFP was released before I started. It could have been for a variety of reasons. Housing consultants, legal experts in this realm are in very high demand. And so again, I wasn't here, but I'm just kind of one of the scenarios that could have been why we didn't receive any bids on this particular proposal. I'm willing to revise this, do a new scope, include the nexus study, and then get assistance to build public support, use data to inform the program design, establish fair, reasonable expectations for developers, ensure program quality, propose revised code language, ordinance drafting, and then implement. So it's a phased approach process for us to amend and update our fair share inclusionary zoning program. In the meantime, staff is creative in looking at innovative ways to get units developed, similar to Animas City Park Overlook, similar to Gage Apartments developments. We are at the table negotiating as we can, case by case right now, to learn barriers, to learn costs, to learn what other incentives we might be able to provide to ensure that projects can be successful. That's our goal. That's where we've been spending more time as staff. And we're looking for assistance to amend fair share at the same time.
And you are getting things built.
And we are
That's-
getting things built.
Without that, interaction, they would have been all free market.
Is, it's home share, or is homes fund, or the staff, are you looking at any opportunities, are there any opportunities to purchase mobile home communities within the city? At the one, but we have multiple mobile home communities.
There's actually two, because Homes Fund did the one next door.
Did they? Right. So
But this is about the
so
fair
that's
share
the
one.
question is there any outreach there? Because those were significant numbers of people already there living and making a huge difference. I'm just curious if there's been a.
Can I bring it back to the agenda item, because
Well,
it's the fair
actually,
share program, not really the
She
use of the
did,
funds.
she did say we were going to kind of block them a little bit, but that is one of the suggestions in
The long
all
term
studies, which
Yeah,
is
it is.
preserving current housing.
That's why I was curious what efforts are underway.
Well, and that was something that I wanted to identify and talk with council about is, normally the fair share fee and lieu have been all earmarked to go to Homes Fund for down payment assistance. And talking with Lisa, their executive director, we are, wanting to brainstorm around how can we get more creative. I'm not saying I don't want to contribute a certain portion of our proceeds from fee and lieu to go to down payment assistance, but how can we get creative with a buy down program? How can we get creative with a rental subsidy program? How can we work on our current housing stock to preserve what we already have while units are being built, while we're getting inventory in the mix? We need more additional rental units, looking at possible 30-day stays or longers and converting some of those units to long-term rentals back to our local workforce. What other programs can we get creative? So I just wanted to get temperature from council. Are we okay that I continue to talk with Homes Fund on how we can additionally get creative? And that would include mobile home parks.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think because the last thing we want to do is make redevelopment so attractive that someone buys some mobile home parks or other lower cost things and tears everything down when there's 30 units there and then builds 25. That doesn't make any sense at all.
I wanted to make a question comment on the fair share program that you just presented. Well, first of all, it's quite complex to do the calculations. I think it's been on the list for updating for quite a long time. And I had sent you an email to see if we can simplify it to the extreme. So it's easier for builders and developers to see what they need to add or what they need to pay or what their options are if they pay. Some of the RFPs bullet points, I think, are items that are covered elsewhere. I mean, they have to meet land use and development codes requirements and zoning requirements. So I think if you speak about the fair share program, the structure of it, in the email, I went very extreme, I think. Can we do it based on square footage? So much percent of square footage needs to be affordable housing. If you don't want to build that affordable housing, then you pay a fee, which is going to be X percentage. And if you want to do a voluntary transfer fee, it's this percent. Because we don't have to follow Denver. We can keep it simple and hopefully make it better for everybody and more successful, because the deed restricted houses that we are adding, I think Councilor Baxter mentioned, is very small on the, no, you didn't mention the other one. The mortgage assistant is very small in number. The deed restricted units are extremely small in number. It will never solve affordable housing. It's not even a drop in the bucket. So have you looked into it, the email I sent?
Yes.
What are your thoughts about it? And what are other councilors' thoughts about it? To go extremely simple.
Well, we
Yes.
tried to revise it and we had an RFP that no one responded to. And so I don't, were you
But the
at that
RFP
council meeting or not? I'm not sure. But I feel like we're working towards getting that draft that we want to have implemented in our city, and that's what we're doing.
So that's the reason I asked for this topic to be discussed, because the RFP and everything that staff has been doing is updating a very complex document with another complex document. And I think now, and that's why the discussion is to do it earlier, sooner than later, before staff spends another whole bunch of time on it, is can we simplify it? Not only for, it would help staff, it would help everybody under the sun.
I mean, if you're expert at writing fair share housing ordinances, then let's do it. Like, the problem is that that's what we're trying to find, is someone who is an expert that can get us the right one.
So this is where we're going. What are we asking
I
them to
think
do?
you're missing something. First sentence up there says draft new RFP. So obviously the previous RFP may not have been what it should have been, and exactly what you're talking about. One of the goals is to simplify everything. I mean, that's always a goal, makes it easy in a new RFP. I don't believe you finished that RFP. So you haven't seen the new RFP yet. So you don't know what's going to be in it yet. So I think your suggestion that it be simplified is great, but right now that's about as far as we can go because we don't know the detail.
So in the agenda package, there's a whole list of bullet points that you were mentioning. So if the council provides direction to make it extremely simple, I'm like, great, we got one other little chip on the block.
Well, it also has to achieve our goals.
It has to achieve our goals. And I'd like to just share, and because I think we also need to wrap this up. You asked the question, you wanted to make certain you had council support to do a variety of things with the fair share money. So I guess I want to be, for myself, totally clear. Try anything you think is going to work to preserve what we have and to build attainable housing. So I am not married to all of this money gets delivered to some unit, because 35 is great, but saving a trailer park at 60 or 70 units to me is pivoting. So I want council to share this. You have my blessing to try a variety of things with this fair share money. I know you're going to rewrite the process and hopefully it'll be simpler. But in the meantime, you need in my view, the flexibility to try some things and to succeed at some and possibly to fail at some. So that's my support. I'm looking for council to provide that consensus.
Yeah, I agree. I think the creativity that the community development department has with that is amazing in recent years. Keep it up. I mean, if there's a way we can put in infrastructure to help a new development out wherever, like, do it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that the $1 million or whatever that's currently in the housing fund that keeps doing, that's money that's locked up. They can't be used for anything else if another opportunity comes up. So I absolutely agree. Let's see what we can do with dollars that create better than 35 units in 7 years that aren't attainable and affordable long term.
On that note,
Did you want to add completely with all of this? I think it's excellent discussion. I support it.
On that note, I'm going to call an adjournment to this meeting. We will come back together at 5:30. Thank you. Thank you.
It's boring.
It's freezing.
It is raining.
Stop sharing. On the top part, the very bad green one.
It's